Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto is put into the past as his old self and yet not cliché reactions to the past part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Looking down from his perch atop the Hokage mountain monument, he could not help but marvel at the beautiful picture that the Hidden Leaf village made as the sun started to set and the last rays of daylight shined across the evergreen treetops and leaves of Konoha. It was truly a sight that moved his heart and touched his soul, letting him know that he had made the right decision, that his sacrifice was worth it, just to see this village once more in this peaceful state, thriving and serene. At that moment he promised himself that he would do anything he could to ensure that it continued that way. It was true that he had seen it a few times in the last couple of months, but it was still an amazing sight to behold. After all, everything he did and all of his actions and sacrifices had bared fruit by giving him this second opportunity, by allowing him to ensure that this village prospered. Still, he watched, unseen, from the very top of the mountains as the shops closed and the vendors packed their stands for the day. He observed, undetected, as the ninjas went about their tasks, patrolling, protecting, training, or simply preparing for one mission or another. It did his heart good to see such semblance of normality, and it brought joy to his recently somber face to know that disaster could be prevented and war kept at bay. A specific figure drew his gaze as a blonde-haired boy climbed down from the highest tree of one of the small, numerous, out-of-the-way parks that were scattered across the village. He saw the boy shuffle in the direction of his apartment, alone on his way home and ignored by many of the remaining people that were milling about still. He studied the bowed blonde head as the container of the nine tails placed his hands deeply into his pockets and, for all intents and purposes, seemed not to notice the sidelong glances he received or the general disregard that the villagers had for him. He knew that the boy had started to question the meaning of those glances and would soon find a way to react to them. Still, it was strange to watch this from afar and even stranger to witness the reactions of the villagers once the boy's back was turned to them. They acted as if the boy didn't exist, as if they had never seen him. However, the small blonde was soon out of sight, and the time he was waiting for drew nearer. He would do everything that he could to help that boy and pledged to himself to do anything in his power to achieve that goal, for he could clearly see himself in the child's position and knew that this time around the kid would be prepared for what was to come. He would be prepared for what he might face in the unforgiving world. This he would see to. With a soul-rending sigh, he shook himself from his thoughts and once again focused on his task. Taking hold of the handle of the small black bag that lay at his side, he prepared to move once more, knowing that this meeting needed to take place but still slightly apprehensive of the possible outcomes that his presence would get. When he sensed that the one he was looking for was finally alone, he prepared himself for the worst, yet still wished for the best. If there was ever a time where he would need luck, he was sure that this would be it, so he braced himself for whatever outcome he might face. Finally, after so much planning and guessing as to how this would play out, it was time for the next step in their plan to be executed, to take the first step into a new, hopefully better direction. The next moment, only the swirl of shadowed leaves could have told of his presence, and even then, there was no trace that he was there a mere second later. The smell of smoke was one of the first things that hit him, and not for the first time did he question if it was because of this old man that Asuma picked up the habit. He dearly hoped that Konohamaru wouldn't follow suit this time around, but then, seeing that both his uncle and grandfather smoked like chimneys, it was perhaps too much to ask. A sense of nostalgia made itself known in the next moment, and he watched avidly while the old man went about his office, storing some scrolls and books, shuffling the papers on his desk this way and that and pausing beside a cabinet every so often, relighting his pipe once more before resuming with the task of getting everything in order. Minutes passed in silence as this old man, who was seen in many ways as a grandfather by the villagers, a respected leader and protector, peered out from the vast window of his private office and toward his sleeping home, unaware of the eyes that observed him intently. This old man had seen the birth of Konoha with young eyes and now looked at it with almost unrivaled wisdom, for he had seen how Konoha had grown and blossomed. He was there as it grew strong and was still here while it weakened. He had been there when the seeds of the tree of Konoha were planted and was still standing while it withered. But that wouldn't happen if he had anything to say about it. He wouldn't allow it. Still, if it were as simple as that, his presence might not be necessary and the risks he was taking might not be needed. Letting out a silent sigh, something that he was doing far too often, he watched for a bit longer before deciding that it was time to reveal his presence. This, above all else, was the most delicate part. After all, one false step and half of the elite ninjas of the village hidden in the leaves would be there without hesitation. It would only take a twitch from their aging leader to bring them all in waves. He needed to try and avoid that, or any kind of confrontation, at any cost, not for his sake, but for theirs and the sake of the village. He knew that most shinobi were somewhat trigger-happy, after all. They would not think twice in releasing a dangerous amount of destruction to capture him, if it were to come to that. Still, this needed to be done, for he couldn't bear the weight of responsibility alone. A good leader knows when to ask for help and who to ask it from. The question in this case had never been about who to ask for help, however, but when to ask for it. He knew that this was his chance, So without moving from the hiding place from where he was observing the old man and his surroundings with every ounce of his senses, he decided to act. Sandaime-sama, he said softly, noting how the third Hokage slowly turned, hands still clasped behind his back, yet completely on alert even before the first syllable of his name was out of his lips. A moment passed as he allowed himself to be seen as only a shadow, knowing that Sarutobi had already called for the ANBU guards to be ready to act, yet with orders to hold. The Hokage didn't have any information or hint of his intentions, so he would probably indulge his curiosity before risking any of his shinobi without reason. Or at least, that was what he was counting on, and what all of their plans hinged on. As is, the Hokage simply stared at his shadow, taking the pipe in his hand and blowing out a cloud of smoke. It was a better reaction than he anticipated, at least. Show yourself, the third demanded, his voice brooking no argument, his posture tensed and ready to react to any perceived threat, or really, anything that simply twitched the wrong way. He had to admit, the old man still had it. It was because of this that he was still Hokage, after all, regardless of his great age. Unhurriedly, he slid out of the wall opposite to the window and in front of the desk, giving a bow to the Hokage before stepping into the light. The first thing that Sarutobi noticed was the long dark blonde hair, tied back into a ponytail very similar to how the Hyuga branch house members preferred it, but not as neat, and the next was the glowing violet-colored eyes that stared back at him with elongated pupils. "Good evening, Hokage-sama," greeted the stranger formally, feeling a bit relieved that the room had not been swarmed by guards. "So far so good. I would greet you, but I do not know who you are," the Sandaime commented lightly, not letting down his guard and probably trying to figure what purpose and what intentions he might hold toward him and his village. Tilting his head, the visitor seemed to ponder something before speaking. "That question has many answers and most of them are quite confusing. Do you have the time to hear my explanations at the moment, Hokage-sama?" The third just stayed silent for an instant, taking in the stranger's appearance. He noticed that he was undoubtedly young, 20 years old at the least, and yet, he had the ability to remain completely undetected by him. Even now, while the stranger stood before him, he could not sense his presence, which was more than slightly disconcerting. He wore a tan shirt with a mask that covered the lower half of his face, a black vest and long, baggy white pants that were wrapped around his lower calves with a series of black leather straps and buckles, and black ninja footwear. There was no forehead protector in sight, as far as he could tell. What caught his attention the most, however, were the startling violet-colored eyes with the slit-like pupils. Never had he seen eyes quite like them, apart from the yellow snake-like version of a former student of his. However, the darkness that his former pupil held in his gaze was not present in this stranger, and unusually, he began to relax in the presence of someone unknown to him, and with completely indefinable intentions while nodding thoughtfully to the question that he had been asked. The young man simply radiated good ninja vibes, for lack of a better expression. It would bother him some time later just how easily he had lowered his guard, however slightly, even with the sense of familiarity that seemed to surround the intruder. But at the same time he would berate himself for being so distrustful and suspicious. A contradiction, to be sure. Maybe he was getting too old for this job. Still, he had more than enough time for this puzzle. Besides, he was sure that if he had answered in the negative, it would be the last that he would see of this intruder. His intentions toward him or Konoha would forever remain unknown, a puzzle that would probably stay unsolved. His very instincts were telling him to not allow that to happen. And his instincts hardly ever led him astray. After taking a small puff from his pipe, he gestured toward one of the chairs in front of his desk and followed the flowing movements of the stranger as he sat down, seemingly without a care, even as he placed the small black bag that he carried on the ground at his feet. There was no sign of a threat, no hostile movement, only a feeling of peace and power that covered this foreigner, not unlike that of a particularly comfortable cloak. If nothing else, it allowed him to push his worries back until a hostile movement was made or a sign of ulterior motives found. Luckily, he would find neither on this night. "Thank you, Sandaime-sama," the stranger said as warmth entered his voice, sounding as if he was a long-lost child greeting his grandfather, his eyes turning a shade clearer than before, even as he clasped his hands in his lap, resting his elbows on the arms of the chair. For some reason, Sarutobi took off his hat and sent a small chakra pulse telling the ANBU to stand down. Tilting his head again, the stranger's eyes simply became another shade clearer before he bowed his head once more. "Your trust is greatly appreciated, Hokage-sama." Surprised that the young ninja in front of him had sensed that and actually understood the message, seeing that only the higher echelons of the Konoha ninja hierarchy knew of that particular code, he just shook his head and nodded once in acknowledgement, placing his hat atop of the desk even if his mind whirred furiously to try and find answers to the hundreds of questions that this stranger raised by his presence alone and a few courteous words. So while his worries were few, his questions, his suspicions and his reservations never left him. "I still do not know who you are," he stated clearly, trying to keep his qualms and doubts at bay. For some unexplainable reason, he could feel that his visitor was smiling at him from behind his mask and it helped ease his worries a bit more, but not by much. "It's a long story, old man Hokage," the stranger said, the cheeky grin noticeable in his tone, even as the familiarity in which he spoke seemed commonplace. "I'll give you the short version first, and answer any questions and give you any proof that you ask for, Ojiken," he answered, and Sarutobi found that he didn't mind the disrespectful terms because of the warmth and familiarity in which they were spoken, even as he began to wonder who exactly would address him in such a way. However, the young man's next words and actions would be the ones that would erase almost all of his reservations and at the same time send his mind into a whirl of speculation. I am the sixth fire shadow of the hidden village of the leaf, or the Rokudame Hokage of Konohagakure no Sato, his guest stated with absolute certainty. Faintly, Sarutobi noted that he was now sitting down, even though he didn't remember taking such action. The abrupt change in tone alone, from light-headed and cheeky to one of deadly seriousness and complete conviction, would have made a lesser man's head spin. But Sarutobi didn't even give it a second thought. What sent him for a loop, however, was the claim to the Hokage title, especially seeing that there was the notable absence of a fifth Hokage at the moment. Maybe the memo got lost in the paperwork. Nevertheless, as he stared intently at the stranger in front of him, the one who alleged to be the sixth Hokage of his village, he could only gaze at the sparkling violet eyes looking back at him sincerely. Slowly, he stood up once more and began an extremely long series of hand seals, molding a diminutive amount of chakra with each, and locked eyes with the unmoving and patient-looking visitor. Finally, after a whole 2 minutes of silence, he finished the last seal, whispering, "Fire Shadow Identification Technique." 1. Immediately after the discharge of chakra that came from using the technique, and the feeling of energy washing over him, atop both the stranger's and his right brow appeared 2 kanji symbols marking the young ninja in front of him as the sixth Hokage of Konoha, even as he knew that the kanji on his own brow marked him as the third. Most of his worries and suspicions fled him at that very moment, as if they had been abruptly pulled out of him. Sitting back down carefully, nervously, Sarutobi did the only thing he could think of. He asked the question, "How?" Smiling lightly, the now confirmed Rokudame Hokage simply answered, "That is too complicated an answer without knowing all the facts. Old man," he began, shrugging, "you should know that this was the only way I could find in which Konoha could continue a peaceful existence, and that only I can do it at this point in time. Could you give me your name before you start explaining, Rokudame?" Sarutobi asked, getting past the surprise and moving on to academic curiosity, like any good professor might show, and already accepting the presents before him. His remaining suspicions, however, began taking a new road to travel. After all, a ninja could not remain surprised for long, or trust so easily. It could easily lead to his death otherwise. Sighing, the sixth Hokage made himself comfortable, looking perfectly relaxed. "Everything starts and ends with who I am, I guess, but that is part of my luck, I would imagine." "Very well, my name, Old Man Hokage, is Uzumaki Naruto," he stated, rolling off his mask to show what remained of the whisker marks that were and are so predominant in his youth. Now only 6 faint, 1 centimeter long scar-like marks remained on his jaw-line, leaving his cheeks unmarred. The next moment, 9 long violet-colored foxtails with white tips were splayed upon the office floor, swishing this way and that, 1 or 2 wrapping themselves protectively around his legs. To say that Sarutobi was stunned would be an understatement, but soon knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that the young man in front of him was, indeed, Naruto. Even if diluted, the feel of the Kyuubi's chakra was unmistakable. An older and wiser one as well, if he judged by looks alone. But if it was true, then that would mean that the person standing in front of him was not from this time, and he had to ask himself, was that even possible? Glancing back at the Rokudame, he knew that there were precious other possibilities. Once he realized this, and noticed the resemblance, he released a soft, heartfelt chuckle. "So you became Hokage then?" "Outstanding," he exclaimed softly, his mind still trying to piece everything together, even as contradictions formed within his thoughts. However, a thought struck him that took the wind out of his sails, a thought that he voiced immediately. "But you don't look to be any older than 20 years of age, and yet you are almost 6 years old at this time. Does this mean that Konoha will fall in the next 15 years? Violet eyes darkened significantly at this statement. "That's what I'm here to prevent, old man. That's what I'm here to prevent," he said as he stood up and started to pace, his 9 tails flowing gracefully behind him. "What happened?" the Sandaime asked, looking worried. Taking a deep breath, Naruto calmed himself as he still paced in front of the desk, looking for the words to explain, relieved that the old man believed him. "I guess that the beginning is as good a place as any to start," he stated, more to himself than to Sarutobi, even if his gaze flickered toward the old shinobi every once in a while. 3 of his tails elongated and gently moved around the 2 chairs that stood directly in front of the Hokage's desk, along with the small black bag, which was placed atop one of the chairs by the tail holding it. It was amusing to see as the tails seemed to unconsciously clear the way for their owner to pace freely, and the third was astonished by this display of unconscious control. He drew hope from the fact that the powers of the Kyuubi could be placed under such command and used for the protection of the village. He, however, was drawn from his thoughts as the young man began to speak. Naruto told of his life since his birth in a way that he had been unable to do until then, telling of how he grew and came to be as he was now. He spoke of his lonely childhood, his broken spirit, and his ever-growing determination to prove himself. He spoke of how his search for any sort of acknowledgement had clouded his vision and delayed his development as a ninja. So starved for attention he was that he even searched for acknowledgement from his enemies. He knew that he needed to make the old man understand all of this, since he would require his help to put most of his plans into motion. Anything else but full disclosure at this time could come back to bite him in the tails later on, even if this was a pretty big gamble. But then, Tsunade had been certain that coming to the Sandaime would be worth the risk, and he was glad that her luck, applied through him, had held out so far. Still, he continued, answering one minor question here and there as he wove the tale of his life, of his failure in the academy and how he coped with it, protecting himself with humor and cheerfulness in a way. After all, it was the only way he could get any attention, even if it was slightly negative. He knew, in spite of everything, that with the way the villagers ignored him, he would have been forgotten and grown bitter or enraged if he hadn't called out for that attention. He explained how it was because of Yumino Irika, his sensei at the academy, that he didn't give up and avoided a terrible fate. Inwardly he wondered if he would have started killing like Gaara if not for the kind-hearted Chunin instructor and the slight acknowledgement he gave him in his childhood. Yumino Irika along with the ever-present shadow of the Sandaime Hokage had loomed behind him since he had memory, comforting him, watching over him and protecting him. They were his guiding light in a life full of darkness. They were the first to truly acknowledge his existence. Still, he continued his tale, highlighting some things, but basically just giving the general gist of it. He noted his many failures in the academy and how he finally graduated and placed in a team, not exactly saying who his teammates were or who their Jonin instructor had been. However, he did speak of his visit to Wave Country in the first instance where the seal that kept the Kyuubi imprisoned cracked slightly, allowing for the demon to push his chakra toward him. That was the first, but certainly not the last time where the Nine Tails chakra was released. Nevertheless, each time it took a bigger toll on my body, to the point where, during one encounter, I used the first tail. The amount of chakra slowly consumed me, even as it healed me immediately after that, he explained, his tails swishing and curling this way and that in a clear show of agitation. Sarutobi wondered on the sheer amount of will it would have taken to completely subdue the Kyuubi, and the extreme burden of what the young man in front of him had had to face to do so. His thoughts quickly made their way to the young, present version of the demon carrier, who was probably now asleep in his small apartment, and he worried about what the future might hold for that child. Seeming to sense his thoughts, however, the sixth continued speaking, in a way that is why I am here, Sandaime-sama. I used every ounce of my power and what remained of my life to come back here for a short period and try to prevent the worst from happening, along with helping you prepare for what even I was not prepared to face. At those words, Sarutobi grasped hold of one of the statements. What remained of your life? He asked with a small amount of anxiety, somehow knowing what he meant, but still wanting to confirm it. Sighing slightly, Naruto stopped in front of the window, four of his tails wrapping around his legs as he gazed toward the night sky of Konoha. Without turning, he started speaking. The demon awoke during that event in Wave Country. It awoke from the slumber induced by the seal, and even if no one noticed it, every time I used his chakra in excess, his instincts would often cloud my own. It was not until I reached a three-tailed transformation that we noticed how my mind would be slowly overwhelmed by the demon and his instincts, and how my body was suffering from the strain. Slowly I was becoming more fox than human. Each time that massive amount of uncontrollable, unbridled chakra broke free, I lost a few years of my life. Even after many battles of both body and mind, by the time I had tamed the demon and completely overcame his mind, gaining control of the fox's instincts, most of my life had been wilted away. Before I came to the past I had only 20 or so years left to live, he finished, his voice soft. Slowly, he turned around, looking at the saddened face of the Sandaime with darkened violet eyes. However, after I gained control of the demon I learned how to protect my body with chakra, how to regenerate and heal without expending my life, and how to even renew most of the cells that by being consumed had shortened my life expectancy. 2. Here, he paused before continuing, turning once again toward the window. But I had no time left, and the process to regenerate my damaged body would have left me severely weakened and left open for attack from my enemies. As his tails unwrapped from his legs and remained unmoving at his feet, the Sandaime looked toward the site of the Hidden Leaf village, remaining silent and allowing the young Hokage to gather his thoughts once again. Naruto simply continued to speak, his voice soft. At that point, I was the only one left that could hold Akatsuki off, or even delay them. Thus they made me the Hokage. I was the only one who could stand in their way and protect the village, the only one who could lead our forces. Nonetheless, it was all futile. They had already taken control of 6 of the Bijou, the tailed demons, and even though they could not get the most powerful, the Kyuubi, because I had already absorbed all of its power, they could still defeat me if they used the other demons against me. My life was dwindling as they kept growing in power. Time became short and fate almost inevitable, he finished, still speaking softly, even as a small smile tugged at his lips. Chuckling slightly, the Sandaime could not help but point something else. Almost inevitable? He asked, taking a puff from his pipe. Hi, Naruto said, as a grin soon bloomed in his, until now, somber face. I had to sacrifice 1 year of my life and some of my power to the time god for every year that I traveled into the past, he explained as his eyes seemed to become slightly clearer once more. It was the last chance, the last desperate hope, and it worked, he said, his grin widening significantly as his tails became animated once more. Turning around, Sarutobi noticed that the chairs were once again in front of the desk as Naruto flopped into one of them, probably placed there by his ever-moving tails. Shaking his head, the old Hokage sat down as well, marveling on the life of the young man before him, the things he had done to protect the very village that hated him, the lengths he had reached to avoid its destruction, and the determination he showed throughout his life as he gained the acknowledgement that he so desired, one person at a time. It was a sad, yet inspirational life all the same. I now have a bit more than 5 years left, but that is enough time to make a better future. Naruto's soft voice filled the office, his eyes closed. Taken aback by this statement, but remembering what the young Rokudaime had said, he couldn't help but ask, "But didn't you mention being able to renew and heal yourself?" Naruto simply answered, his eyes still closed. To summon the time god one needs a certain amount of power that can only be used for this purpose if one were the vessel of certain particular demons, for demons themselves do not meddle with gods, yet still have the type of chakra necessary to summon them. Only those few that have the density and type of chakra needed to perform the task can do it, a Jinchuriki in this case, and then, they need to be able to use the full power of the bija sealed within themselves. If one were unable to amass and use enough of this chakra, one would die in the process of summoning it. At the moment, this means that only I could ever summon him, since the Hachibi, the eight-tailed demon, just falls short of the amount of chakra required along with the type of chakra needed, and even then, I'm the only one who has been able to completely tame the beast that was sealed within me and develop the technique. However, I needed to forfeit not only 15 years of my life, but offer a bit of my power, permanently, for the summoning, just enough that I couldn't summon him again without losing my life. I can't renew the cells that I have lost, seeing as I would need my full potential to even attempt the regeneration, and even if I tried, it would take too much time with my current chakra levels. He paused and opened his eyes to stare at Sarutobi unwaveringly. And time is not something we have at the moment. This is my sacrifice, old man, one that I willingly made knowing the consequences. After that last statement, silence engulfed the office and the Sandaime turned his thoughts inward. After all, the person who developed the technique that mostly resembled what the young Hokage spoke of was the Yondaime himself, his successor, who made the sacrifice of his soul to summon the death god to seal away the most powerful demon on the face of the planet. Still, to summon something, a sacrifice was always needed, be it a drop of your blood, chakra, or your own soul, as was the case with the dead demon seal that the fourth used. Taking note of the almost immeasurable amount of chakra that the Kyuubi possessed, and understanding this fact, along with the power that the eight tails might have, it probably meant that almost all of the nine tails chakra had to be used to summon the time god. If his thoughts were correct, then the young ninja in front of him would have probably suffered from chakra depletion when he arrived at this time. In front of him, the sixth Hokage smiled. "I got here 5 months ago, and my chakra is still not completely replenished," he stated, as if he were able to sense the old man's thoughts. That statement alone would keep Sarutobi's mind occupied for weeks to come, but he swiftly pushed that thought away. Now that he somewhat understood the situation, he needed to know the young Hokage's real purpose to come and search for him. "I understand," he said, inhaling from his pipe to help him calm his thoughts. "What I need to know now is what help I may be able to provide to assist you in your quest to derail this unfortunate future. After all, you wouldn't have risked coming to me if you didn't have need of my assistance." A broad smile spread across the young Hokage's face as he stood up once more before putting his mask back on. "Good," he said, satisfaction on his tone, as he walked over to where he left the black piece of luggage. "I thought that this would have been a whole lot more difficult. For some reason I thought I would have had to knock out every ninja in this village and take some drastic measures to convince you, Ojikin," he finished with a sheepish smile that Sandaime could pick up from the tone of voice. Rummaging in the bag, the future sixth Hokage gave a soft but triumphant cry, holding a scroll in his hand before taking out a wrapped bundle and a middle-sized wooden box which Sarutobi noticed had some seals placed on it. "This," Naruto said, handing the scroll to Sarutobi, "is the most relevant information that I've gathered and written from my memories in the last 5 months, along with some suggestions of things you should look into so that certain situations can be avoided. I hope you act as swiftly as possible. Konoha can't afford to be weakened now." He paused and placed the sealed box and the long-wrapped object on top of the desk, his voice turning serious. "The names on the first section of the scroll are spies for both Orochimaru and Akatsuki. I suggest that you dispose of them as soon as possible and begin to strengthen the village while doing so, since they could just place new spies if things remain as they are." Opening the scroll, Sandaime read gravely through the list of names. "Mizuki?" he pointed out, a little doubtful of the young Chunin. Without preamble, the young Hokage just answered. He killed a lightly wounded teammate during a mission to retrieve some scroll or another, and was brought in contact with Orochimaru after that, he said bluntly. "His personal ambitions are a threat to Konoha." "Very well," Sarutobi sighed regretfully, closing his eyes at the defeated look on the old man's face. Naruto explained quietly, "It was because of Konoha's lowered guard during these years of peace that the opportunity arose for it to be attacked. Even though Orochimaru has been dealt with, he is a simple distraction that Akatsuki allowed to exist so that Konoha could be weakened, making me more accessible to them. At the present time he was still a member of Akatsuki, but he was already showing signs of dissent, so he won't be missed." Slightly startled, Sarutobi raised his head from the information he was reading in the scroll. "Dealt with?" "Yes," the Rokudaime answered him, gesturing toward the sealed box, his tail swishing in delight as he started unwrapping the bundle in front of the old man, revealing the Kusanagi, Orochimaru's sword. At this time he hadn't changed from his original body and had not been able to gain most of the power that made him so difficult to kill the last time I fought with him, which made him ripe for the picking. Tapping the sealed wooden box, drawing Sandame's dazed expression to take note of the item, Naruto continued, I disposed of his body and here lies his head, he simply said as he withdrew a small scroll from some unseen pocket and handing it to the old man. He had already started forming the hidden village of the sound, along with planning on how to attack Konoha and abandoning Akatsuki. But that is a problem that won't plague us this time around, he finished and turned around, his tails disappearing from sight as he picked up the black bag once again. For one, at this moment the Akatsuki won't think anything of his death, especially since I left proof of his plan to abandon the organization, and second, since he is gone, Konoha won't suffer as it did in my time, and the real battles can take place away from here if we are lucky. Shocked to the core, Sandame let his pipe fall as he shakily called the young man to stop. What is in this scroll and where are you headed? Turning his head so that he could look at Sandame from the corner of his eye, he answered simply, that scroll holds information on the locations that Orochimaru used to do his experiments in so that they could be investigated and his entire operation shut down. You have a month before Orochimaru is missed. He paused and turned his head slowly. As for where I'm going to search for the Godame. The fifth? Sarutobi asked faintly, I haven't even selected one yet. Turning around he met the clear violet-colored eyes of the young ninja. And you took too long to do it, dying at the hands of Orochimaru and leaving your village without a leader. That is not a mistake that should be done twice, he said, not taking his eyes from the old man, trying to make him understand, even if his voice was soft, there is a lot I need to do, and it is your job to see that this village is strong enough to endure what is to come, old man. Here I am not the sixth and it is not my sole duty to take care of Konoha, even if I am working to ensure its future. You still need some help, the help of a strong leader, while I use the time that I have left training the young Naruto to do what I was and will be unable to accomplish. Very well, Sarutobi said, finally understanding the situation. How long will it take and who will take the place as the Godame? Naruto just turned around and started to walk out. I will be back in no more than 2 weeks. I don't have any more time than that at the moment, he answered as he melded into the walls. And the Godame will be old lady Tsunade, he said with a smirk very evident in his tone of voice, even as his shadow disappeared from the room, leaving no trace that he was ever there. Even if I have to drag her drunken carcass all the way from whatever casino she is at, to the very gates of the Hidden Leaf, came his voice from everywhere in the office. The Sandame's surprised laugh and hackling, choking cough echoed across the administrative tower for well over 15 minutes. Still, within his mind, his thoughts were not so jovial even as he stared at the scroll that the Rokudame had left. Can I trust him? Can I afford not to? Will he truly be able to bring Tsunade back? Question after question invaded his mind all at once, and while his suspicions of ill intent had been assuaged, his worry for Konoha came roaring back to the forefront of his mind. He needed to think everything over and make a decision soon. Several decisions, in fact. Time was not a luxury he had at the just then, even with such timely warning. It should not be wasted. And as he looked toward the sealed box resting innocently atop his desk, he couldn't help but think that maybe his own time was coming to an end as well. Maybe he had waited too long to appoint a new successor. Looking out through his window one more, he dearly hoped that the sixth would be able to bring Tsunade back. It took him 3 days to track down the gambling Sanin, and even then he had to wait for 2 more days as he watched her and tried to find the correct moment to approach her. After all, it's never good to catch her in a bad mood, especially when that bad temper was unleashed by some poor sod that wanted her to pay some of her debts. Needless to say, that idiot will probably spend a week in the hospital for getting in her way. After waiting for her to cool down and get good and drunk, he thought it would be a good time to talk to her. But then she started winning some money while gambling and that put her on edge, which meant that he now had to tread extra carefully. Shaking his head as he pondered these thoughts, he remembered how the slug Sanin used her luck as some kind of sixth sense. After all, she was always unlucky while gambling unless something bad was coming her way, and as things stood at the moment, being made the Hokage of the village she was running away from definitely counted as a bad omen. So he kept watching from afar, letting her nerves get frayed as she tried to figure out what was going to happen. He took notice that Shizen looked younger than he remembered, but that was the case with almost everyone but old lady Tsunade, who looked the same as always due to the permanent henge or transformation technique, or whatever it was that she used to conceal her true appearances. If his calculations were correct, the attendant was about 21 years old at the moment, and quite an accomplished medic nin, if he remembered the tales of her training under the gambling addict. He idly wondered if the title of legendary sucker had been attached to the medic just yet. Still, his time was running low, and he knew that he would have to resort to some very heavy artillery to convince the slug tamer to take the job. He just hoped that he could pull it off. The sun was starting its descent, marking the start of the afternoon. The city was teeming with activity, filled with people looking for entertainment, be it in fairs, restaurants, bars, casinos, or what the perverted hermit and his old sensei referred to as Information Central. Still, he was glad that most of this outpost was dedicated to more wholesome activities, or he would be afraid of encountering the perverted Sanin as well. That would be a disaster in and of itself. After all, he didn't want Tsunade to get angry again so soon. It would just make everything too difficult, and he would have to do as he told Sandaime, and knock them down, and drag them to Konoha. However, that was his last resort and final plan. Something to do if all else failed. Reasoning would be first, and if that didn't work, emotional manipulation and blackmail would then be used. A bet would probably be the next most logical approach, and if all else failed, then the knocking her unconscious and dragging her to the hidden leaf would be done. Tired of waiting, he twisted his neck slowly and rotated his shoulders in preparation. He relaxed as the satisfying feeling of his bones snapping into place spread across his body. He set his eyes on the target once more and disappeared without a trace or a sound. The rooftop that had harbored him, while he watched the Sanin's every move, showed no sign that someone had spent the last few hours there. "Good afternoon, Tsunade-sama," a soft voice said from behind her as a small breeze ruffled her hair. Turning around, she found herself looking into the most peculiar eyes she had ever seen, not because of their shape, but because of their color. A vibrant violet that was even more surprising than the elongated pupils. However, she turned immediately suspicious of this stranger, both because of her sudden winning streak in the casinos and the fact that he already knew her name, which made her even more cautious. The fact that half of his face was covered by a mask only added to the difficulty of identifying him. Not that it mattered much, since she already knew that she didn't know him. Resigning herself to her fate, for now, she made her annoyance clear in her voice and answered yes. For some reason, though, she thought that the stranger was smiling at her, especially since his eyes seemed to lighten somewhat. "Could I have a word with you, Tsunade-sama?" he asked politely. Thinking on it slightly while looking him over, she immediately knew that he was a ninja, but couldn't find any sign of a Hitai 8 or forehead protector to denote what village he was affiliated with. The closed black vest that he wore was not that of a Chunin or Jonin, even if it was similar, and he didn't have any other distinctions of rank. This added to the fact that she couldn't remember seeing him in the bingo book, and she rightly deduced that he was not a missing nin either. Even as they stared at each other, she thought everything through. He did not show any kind of ill will towards her, and she was almost certain that he was smiling behind his mask. All these things pointed to only one thing in her mind, and if she was wrong, well, she wasn't one of the legendary Sanin for nothing. If worse came to worse, she could always kick his ass. However, she was annoyed at being interrupted at this time, seeing that she was headed toward the bar and a good bottle of sake. Everyone knows not to interrupt her drinking, even if it hadn't started yet. If this idiot wanted something, he'd have to work for it. "You already had a word," she finally said and turned around toward the bar, the entire exchange only taking a mere moment. She noted with some satisfaction that his rather weak presence had disappeared. He was probably cannon fodder, seeing as he had so little chakra, or a pathetic ninja if he couldn't mask himself well enough. Even after all these years, it seemed that no one had learned to send better shinobi after her. She was startled out of her thoughts, however, when she entered the bar and found a pair of glowing violet eyes staring intently at her from a booth at the back of the establishment, sipping on some kind of beverage. Silently, he gestured to the seat opposite his and signaled the bartender to serve her a drink. The calm, placid look in his eyes told her that it was in her best interest to do so, and for some reason, she took notice. Well, maybe they were sending better shinobi. Still, when she sat down, he only stared at her, not speaking or doing anything but taking a small sip from his drink from time to time. How he did it without taking off his mask, she didn't know, but it was a strange thing to notice in such a situation, she was sure. Nothing was said for a good half hour, and Tsunade was already feeling a bit warm from drinking, even if she didn't overdo it, just in case the stranger decided to do something. When Shizen sat down beside her, she looked at the stranger for a bit before giving her a look that clearly said, "Who the hell is this?" "Good afternoon, Shizen-san." The gentle voice of the violet-eyed shinobi startled them out of their staring contest, or womanly communication, as the case might be. It was all a matter of perception after all. He just inclined his head in greeting and kept sipping at his drink, as if waiting for something. Nothing more was said, and Shizen was silenced with a look from the slug Sanin when the young attendant was about to say a greeting back. The message in that look was simple: "Let me handle this." However, after another half an hour of silence and staring, which Tsunade would never admit had started to creep her out, she finally broke. "What do you want?" Even for a ninja, she wasn't very patient, and she knew by now that he was waiting for her to crack. Well, sometimes you had to pick and choose your fights, and for some unknown reason she was somehow certain that she wouldn't be able to shake the particular ninja off. Call it a woman's intuition. Of course, there was the fact that she had been running away, from what she had already forgotten, and knew when it was best to simply make a stand. It had been years since that had happened, though, she suddenly remembered. The lightning of those violet eyes was the only thing that alerted her to his change of mood, even if that strange sensation that made her think that he was smiling came back tenfold. Creepy. It was as if he knew what she was thinking as well. "I have urgent business that I need to discuss with you, Tsunade-sama," he finally said, his voice low and calm as he said this. For some reason, this aggravated the legendary medic Nin to no end. A vein throbbed in her temple and she couldn't help but narrow her honey-colored eyes as a full hour of restrained irritation finally come apart suddenly. I don't have any money to pay whatever debt you're here to collect for, she said, slamming her palm on the table and half standing up, pissed. After all, why else would someone come after her? A low, smooth chuckle from the stranger stopped her rant before it started as he stayed impassive even under the assault of her mid-level glare. Grown and experienced ninja would have been quaking in fear and scared stiff with the expression she wore at the moment. And yet this stranger did nothing more than laugh lightly, even as the table still trembled under her slight assault. A mere love tap to be sure. When her gaze turned incredulous, he looked up at her and spoke, Tsunade-sama, I'm not here because of any debt that you may or may not have incurred, but to speak with you about something that is in your best interests to hear. I will be waiting for you a mile away from the east entrance of this outpost, close to the base of the mountains. He paused and half stood so that they were staring each other in the eye before continuing with his gentle tone of voice. If you are not there by mid-afternoon tomorrow, I will come and make you listen. It was a promise, not a bluff. That much she was certain about. Then, before she had a chance to blink or say another word, he was gone, not leaving even the smallest of traces, or even making the faintest of sounds. No smoke or flickering, nor even a gust of air that showed that he left. Sitting down rather roughly, she bleakly noticed that the small amount of chakra that she sensed from him was because that was what he wanted her to sense. For that split second after he had finished, she simply knew that it was a promise that he would be able to carry out, that he would make her listen, and that humbled her in a way that she hadn't felt for years. It reminded her that she wasn't as strong or, dare she say it, as young as she once was. So much for seeing underneath the underneath, she thought ruefully while finishing off her drink. She was getting complacent, however. Her curiosity was stirred, so she just stood up and started to leave. Let's go, Shizun, she yelled at her apprentice, even as the 20-year-old paid the bartender before scrambling after her while asking question after question about the stranger. Waving a hand at the attendant to get her attention and her silence, Tsunade just gave her a determined look. I know exactly the same thing that you do, Shizun, and if you want to find out anything more, then stop talking and start running. And with that both medic Neens took off in the direction of the east entrance. When they were close to a mile away from the town, they spotted the stranger seated cross-legged in a picnic blanket, his eyes closed and drinking tea. This time, however, he had his vest opened and as soon as they were closed enough, he gestured for them to sit down, something which Shizun did immediately only to notice that Tsunade's eyes were locked into something that hung from the stranger's neck. The young attendant just gasped as she looked at the emerald-colored amulet that belonged to Tsunade's grandfather, the first Hokage. After all, he had tried reasoning, so it was high time he turned to emotional manipulation. Shizun quickly looked back toward the Sanin, only to see her firmly clutching her own amulet. How? Came the strangled question from the slug tamer in a vastly similar way as the Sandaime just a few days ago. You gave it to me, Tsunade Bacon, he answered simply as he opened his eyes, looking directly at the legendary medic Neen. As to how, he said, taking the amulet in his left hand and tracing it gently with his right index finger. I am the Rokudaime Hokage of the Hidden Leaf, and the former vessel of the Kyubi from 15 years into the future, he stated before raising his eyes and locking them with the startled amber eyes of the medic Neen. And I am here to look for my predecessor, and the Godaime of Konoha, he continued, his gaze turning back to the amulet, voice softening somewhat. You gave this to me when I was 13, still a genin, and Jiraiya took me with him when he was sent searching for you after the Sandaime's death. He paused at their gasps, but continued nonetheless. We found you and Jiraiya gave you the message that you were selected as the next Hokage by the council. But you refused and said that only fools would want to bear that title. He stopped again and raised his gaze to see that she was staring at him with her other hand placed over her mouth. It took some time, but he continued with his story, remembering it as if it were yesterday. He told Tsunade of what happened and how she became the Godaime in the future along with the circumstances behind her appointment. He told her about their bet, telling her about mastering the Rasengan in 1 week for him to win even as he grasped his own amulet tightly while he recounted how he had woken up with it around his neck after she had saved his life. He told of her encounter with Orochimaru and how she overcame her fear of blood. In short, he told her how she became the Godaime of Konoha and how she took the mantle and title proudly. He chuckled softly when he was done, letting the amulet fall to his chest as he leaned forward and took the hand that was not around her own amulet in his. I have only 5 years left to live, and I need them to train my younger self so that he can fight and face what is to come without all the hindrances and complications that I faced the first time around. For that to happen, Konoha needs a strong leader and a Hokage that they can respect, and that Obacon is you, he finished softly, still holding her hand. Silence fell around the clearing they were in as the birds twittered and a gentle breeze blew across it. Giving her hand a squeeze, he gently placed it in her lap, trying not to disturb her thoughts. Leaning back, he served 2 more cups of hot tea and placed them in front of the 2 medic Neens before drinking his own in silence. Some 10 minutes later, Tsunade seemed to have come back from within her thoughts and took the tea in hand, and after checking with Shizun, took a sip. Nodding in apparent satisfaction, she drew a small envelope and put a bit of a fine white powder into her tea, which Naruto recognized as the one she used to get rid of the effect of alcohol. Not a word was said for some time as she regained her bearings. After all, it's not every day that a complete stranger claims to come from the future and tells you that you are to be the next Hokage of the village you abandoned. What's more, his explanations had enough unknown facts to give credibility to his story. Looking up from her tea, she found him looking at her. How do I know that what you are saying is the truth? She asked. She needed confirmation. He tilted his head in thought, before slowly lifting his hand and lowering his mask, and then taking off the amulet. This is the first time in more than 7 years that I've taken it off, he said as he handed her the amulet for her to confirm its authenticity. When my time reaches its end, my chakra will burn my body and that amulet along with it. It is a representation of my dreams and the confidence you placed on me all those years ago that dream could be made a reality, he explained at her curious look when he handed her the green gem. Taking a deep breath, he went on, the proof that I am the Rokudame can be given to you by the old man Hokage. I have no doubt that he will give it, he said, and she nodded. I said that I was the container of the Kyubi, because I have already absorbed all of its chakra, and as he said this 9 violet-colored foxtails with white tips appeared, splayed around and behind him, curling in his lap, swishing in their place, yet not even disturbing the 3 cups of tea that were placed close to him. They literally radiated chakra, for they were embodiments of energy, and it was both heavy and thick, as if normal chakra were only a pale comparison. Then again, he wasn't even suppressing them this time. It would be obvious that the chakra in his tails was not normal. At this, Shizen stumbled back while Tsunade just looked at the tails and him in amazement. For me to tame and subdue the fox, much like your regeneration technique, he explained to Tsunade, seeing that she understood by the widening of her eyes. My body lost most of its years, such was the amount of chakra the 9 tails possessed. And even then, to gain control and mastery of the last 4 of its tails and the rest of his power, I needed to use a method that I developed. To travel this far back, to when I could make a difference, I had to give 15 of my 20 remaining years of life to the time god, and now I only have a bit more than 5 years left, he finished, raising a hand and caressing what was left of the whisker marks in his jaw, remembering that particular struggle. Before she could ask any questions, he continued, still caressing the faint marks, which only drew attention to them. If you have any more questions about that particular part, the Sandame can fill in the rest of the gaps. I would prefer it if my purpose, my identity, and what I have done to remain a secret, even after this body finds its end, he stated, looking at them intently until they nodded. As for the last bit of proof about his story, he just raised his right hand and in the next moment a swirling purple orb of chakra stood in his palm. It was one of the techniques that made the Yondaime famous, and only 2 people could currently do it at this level. Tsunade could only look at it. The Rasengan, she whispered, his technique. And that was the last thing that convinced her. She nodded at him, and the orb was immediately dispelled. Looking at his tails, she realized something. You could kill me if you wanted to, she voiced bluntly. Naruto just blinked and laughed, a wide smile crossing his face, immediately reminding her of her little brother. I could, he said after his laughter died, leaving his wide smile in place. Slowly he leaned in, as if to tell a huge secret. But I need you alive, oh bacon, he winked. Besides, I like you too much to do that. I would, however, knock you down and drag you back to Konoha if you started getting stubborn. With the mood considerably lightened, Tsunade handed him his amulet again, almost reverently, knowing that it was real and how much it meant to him. And to think that someone broke the supposed curse of that necklace. So you are really here to offer me the position of Godame? She asked, her voice somewhat resigned. His smile just widened a bit more, and he placed a hand behind his neck, looking sheepish. Well, yeah. But think of it this way, this time you'll have old man Hokage to help you with the paperwork. Last time you had to do it all by yourself, he finished, giving a squinted-eyed chuckle. It was at that moment that the fact that he was really from the future struck her, as if Gamabunta himself had suddenly fallen upon her. And she realized that she didn't even know who he was. Looking at Shizen, she noticed that her apprentice was probably suffering from a brain overload and her eyes were slightly glazed. I'm sorry, but I never asked your name, even if you seem to know us so well. At this statement, his eyes darkened just a bit before returning to their light coloring and started twinkling. Pointing at himself with the thumb of his free hand, he exclaimed proudly, but not in a loud tone of voice, I'm Uzumaki Naruto. Hearing this, she just smiled slightly, thinking of how young he was, already carrying the title of Hokage. She wondered what could have happened that required him to take such extreme measures, but seeing his smile, she decided to ask another time. Then she thought of what she lost, and what going back to Konoha might bring. Should she take the job? Was she ready to sacrifice her life for a village that she was running away from? Her thoughts, however, were interrupted by Naruto when he called for her. Blinking, she asked him to repeat what he was saying. The young man just smiled slightly at her, before pointing out that it was getting dark. Like I said, I will give you until tomorrow afternoon to think about it. But there is one thing that you should see before you make your decision. Curious, she asked. What is that? Well, you should get back to your rooms for this. Should I take you there? He asked, standing up in a fluid movement before extending his hand to help her up, leaving his things behind. Once she was on her feet, she noticed that Shizen was dazed, and would probably take a few moments before becoming focused again. Noticing this, she just nodded at his offer and he walked over to them and placed one hand in each of their shoulders. One moment they were in the clearing, the next a series of shadows started to move, resembling the shadows made by falling leaves and their swaying branches, and the next, they were in their room. If she were naive enough to consider it, she might have thought that they just moved instantaneously. Turning toward the young Hokage after helping her apprentice into one of the beds, giving her a mild sleeping agent for now, she asked, "What is it that I should see?" She asked, sighing. He just gestured for her to take a seat. "When I decided that coming to the past was the best option available to us, you were still hospitalized from a fight where you had to use your Genesis rebirth technique again, something that you had already used once before. It left you quite weak and basically unable to keep your job as Hokage," he started to explain, and she nodded, knowing extremely well the side effects of the skill. Clearing his throat, he continued, "I was chosen as your successor because I was the strongest ninja left in the village, and held the title for almost a year before circumstances forced me to do the only thing that I had left. So I sacrificed what remained of my life for the time needed to prepare for the future." He paused and was about to continue, but she interrupted. "I thought you had already explained most of this," she trailed off. Sighing, he sat on the floor and picked one of his tails before starting to stroke it. "Yes, I have, but you must understand, during all those years, I developed many of my own techniques, along with the one that ultimately allowed me to come back in time," he said and looked at her. "One of those techniques was modified by you during your stay in the hospital when you learned about the time god summoning technique that I made and planned to use." He paused. Taking a deep breath, "You made a memory sealing technique, storing a few memories within me so that I could give them to you once I found you." He laughed nervously, knowing that this was a bit confusing. However, Tsunade understood the gist of it and was quite intrigued by the idea. "Could you show me some of your memories with this technique?" she asked. "Well, that's the difficult part, and something we couldn't overcome in the little time we had," he answered. "Since everyone has such diverse minds and they process information and thoughts so differently, only the person whom the memories belong to would be able to make any sense of them," he finished with a slight shrug. "So you haven't seen these memories?" she asked, and when she received a negative response, she thought about it. The allure to learn whatever her future self had deemed for her to see was too great. It really didn't take too much thought, and for whatever reason, she trusted the young man in front of her, so she let him know of her decision. "Very well then, just lie down. The old hag told me that some of these memories would be unpleasant, but that you needed to see them anyways if you were to become Hokage," he explained, and she nodded and lied down. "I will keep watch outside for tonight, but I'll be in the same clearing for the rest of the day. If or when you make a decision, come and find me, okay?" Tsunade only nodded her assent once again, a bit nervous about the memories. After all, she knew that whatever she deemed unpleasant would be nothing short of terrifying. She lay down and tried to relax, watching as Naruto lifted the left sleeve of his tan shirt, uncovering 3 seals that vaguely resembled a 3-element seal. However, these seals held strange characters within the enclosure, and she could just make out the symbols for memory and seal around those strange patterns. Her observations were interrupted when Naruto asked if she was ready, which she confirmed. He stood beside her and did a quick succession of hand seals, his hands a blur of motion that even someone with the Sharingan would be hard-pressed to see. When he finished, he quickly brought his left hand to her forehead, and before she sunk within her memories, she noticed the trail of blood that passed along all 3 seals. She vaguely wondered about what kind of seal this was that needed a blood sacrifice to be released before darkness took her, and a tidal wave of memories washed over her mind. Naruto just stood there for a good 10 minutes until the 3 seals completely disappeared from his forearm. After all, much like the strain that he suffered from training with shadow clones, Tsunade would be incapacitated by the great influx of information into her brain. Allowing for his tails to withdraw as well, he gently took his hand from Tsunade's forehead, left a small note to Shizen vaguely explaining the situation, and left for the roof of the opposite building where he would be able to keep watch. Morning passed without event, and Naruto spent the better part of it meditating atop a tree branch, hidden from view yet with all of his senses on alert. Much of the time he would think about what memories the old Tsunade might have sent to her younger self, but as much as he pondered on it, he knew that it would be hard to guess, especially with such devious a woman as the legendary Sanin. Still, he passed the hours in thought, meditation, and even munching on some of the snacks that he brought with him. However, he also thought about his plans and the best course of action now, knowing full well that his meeting with his younger self was close at hand. There were some things that had to happen before he could take charge of the little boy's training, though, and prepare him for what was to come. He knew that the Kyuubi would be the first obstacle, and he was already prepared for that. But not for the first time did he wonder what kind of impact this would have had on him at that age, and he tried to place himself of those small shoes once more. He knew that all he had craved was for someone to care at that moment, which would later become a prolonged thirst for acknowledgement. So it was not out of the question to wonder how the boy would turn out if he received both care and acknowledgement at such a young age, along with the opportunity to learn and train to fulfill his dream of becoming Hokage. If he already had that dream, that is. In the end, if he remembered correctly, it was about at this time that the thought started to make its way into his head, since Sandaime had already told him stories of the great ninjas, and he had already asked the old man about being a ninja himself. The dream of being the best ninja in the village was probably already in his little head, since classes at the academy started this year for the small Naruto. It would not take a lot for him to link the fact that the best ninja in the village was the Hokage himself, and strive for that goal. Releasing a small breath, he pushed those thoughts aside and disappeared in a swirl of leaves, only to reappear in front of Tsunade and Shizen as they came close to his previous position. He looked up at the sun and noticed that it was just after lunch. Seeing the small smile in the Sanin's face, he couldn't help but ask, "Have you made a decision, Obacon?" Tsunade's smile just changed into a smirk as Shizen's widened. "That's Godame Obacon to you, brat," she said, stepping closer to him, placing her hands on each side of his face and lowering his head to place a kiss on his forehead, just like she had when he was young. Naruto just stayed still the whole time, but his eyes visibly lightened, she remembered. And that was all that he needed to know. Both medic Nins got the feeling that he was smiling beneath his mask, and as Naruto started to turn to lead the way back to Konoha without another word said for the time being, a hand on his shoulder stopped him. Turning, he gave a questioning look at the Sanin, too emotional to speak. "I've been thinking," she said, looking into his lightened eyes, "since you want your identity to remain secret and in Uzumaki Naruto already exists." She paused, taking a small breath, her eyes bright. "Would you honor my brother's memory and use his name?" she asked as his head lowered, his hair obscuring his expression. "Would you be willing to be referred to as Nawaki for the time that you have left?" Slowly a tear left the corner of his eye and fell into his mask. He wondered briefly where she had come up with this and was slightly overwhelmed as he tried to respond, knowing the significance of the name, especially for her, and coming short a few times until he succeeded. "The honor would be mine, Tsunade Obacon," he finally answered, looking into her eyes before she pulled him in for a hug. At that moment, if only for a brief second, his eyes were a clear, crystalline blue. Gazing out at the panoramic view of the Hokage monument that her new office afforded her, she couldn't help but feel that a missing piece of her was finally found. Such was the importance that a village made in a ninja's character and mind. It was home, and it was always welcoming after whatever struggles you could have encountered. And though only a few knew of her return, the trees that her grandfather placed all around the village when he created it seemed to, nonetheless, give her a warm welcome. It took only a few days to reach Konoha after the newly named Nawaki asked her to take the position of Godame Hokage. It irked her somewhat how easily she caved in his presence, but she understood that he just knew her that well, and knew what to do and say to make her accept. The fact that she now had some memories of when he was 12, when she had accepted the title during his time and later on in his life seemed to help, and she was certain that she would have declined the position had she not seen them. Those memories showed her and made her remember all that she had tried to repress, along with making her realize what her own dream was. A dream that had died with her little brother and Dan, but one that Uzumaki Naruto had rekindled once more, even if it was trough memories that she hadn't truly experienced. In a certain way, it was cheating that she already had proof that such a dream could become reality, but it also made her strive for it all the more. There was a young Naruto out there, one that needed some of her guidance to achieve his potential all the more quickly. It just made her wonder about the young boy and the difficulties he faced because of the village that he loved. The Sandaime had filled her in on how harsh the boy's life was and filled the gaps about his future version as well. It was shameful how the village treated him, but she understood that her sensei was already doing everything he could, which was another reason why she decided to return. Memories of the state of affairs in Konoha when her future self had taken the leadership of the village had been swirling in her mind. The village had been a disaster then, and it was weakening now. Sarutobi had been too kind in his position, and that caused the village to be unprepared and its inhabitants far too naive. It was a problem that she decided to fix, and she was just itching to be announced as the Godame to be able to give a few people a piece of her mind. Not to mention that the council needed a good reminder of just who the head of the village was by whatever means necessary. Sarutobi-sensei had been pushed around for too long, what with wanting to keep everyone happy. Well, they would be in for quite a surprise since she was not going to go easy on them. And if they didn't like it, well, they would just have to adapt or leave. There was no place in Konoha for the weak, be it of mind, body, or soul, especially within its leadership. A knock interrupted her thoughts, and she turned to see Shizen entering the office. It was quite spacious, and she had yet to take the time to arrange it to her liking, though she had at least prepared a little nook beside her desk for Tanten. It was also as Nawaki had said, after a few days with her old sensei and current Hokage, and she was almost completely up to date with all village affairs. Now she only had to check the records and rosters for the ninjas of each rank and their skills. In a week's time she would be more than ready to take up the post, knowing that her sensei would still be there to lend a hand whenever it was needed. The old man was one of the greatest minds in the village, after all. Besides, with the previous Hokage acting as an advisor, the two of them together held more power than the council. That is, as long as both of them agreed, and Nawaki had seen that they would. Not for the first time in the history of the village would there be three Kages working together, past, present, and future, just like when the village was first established. Sighing, she just turned from the view to see that her attendant had the rosters for all the shinobis of Konoha. Giving another mournful sigh, she resigned herself to her fate and just sat down with her apprentice and started to go over them, taking notes on the genins and their teams along with the chunins and jonins, and what they specialized in. However, a part of her mind was still in the young man she just met a few days past. Even if she didn't know any of his abilities, the fact that he had tamed such a powerful demon on his own and lived to tell the tale spoke greatly of his character. The fact that he could still smile after the life he has lived was nothing short of amazing. That he actually sacrificed what remained of his life so that his friends and his village could avoid what he suffered made him unique. He would be an unacknowledged leader, and his sacrifice would only be known by a few, and ultimately lost in history. He would be a Hokage that would slip through the fingers of memory, and his deeds and accomplishments remain unrewarded. He would go without receiving the respect he and his actions deserved. Yet still, it was a willing sacrifice on his part, and one that he did without regret. And for someone who has only wanted to be acknowledged, it was a sacrifice that few people could ever make. However, he would leave a legacy and a way for his dreams to be fulfilled, and she knew that all the hope that he had, and all of his dreams would be given to a young Naruto to accomplish, even if the young vessel never knew of them. Nawaki had told her that he planned to train the young child to reach his potential so that he might surpass him, and do what he, himself, could not accomplish. She had a feeling that the young boy would be a force to be reckoned with when the future blonde was done. Then again, she hadn't had the time to even see the boy and made herself a promise to go search for him before she was announced as the fifth. She needed to see for herself, and without the villagers noticing who she was and what she would become, just what the boy had gone through. Moreover, she wanted to see and test his character. She needed to see if the determined boy from her new memories resided within the young vessel. She needed to know if her own dreams could be placed on his small shoulders. Slowly, the hours passed and the records they were going through dwindled. Morning was coming to a close and she dearly wanted to get away from the damned paperwork. Sending a mild glare at Shizen, who just smirked at her and passed another log for her to read, she just resigned herself to finishing all of this as soon as possible. One of the memories she received was of what happened when you ignore paperwork. After all, needless to say, it was not pretty. She shivered at the memory and tried to reconcile the yelling Shizen of the future, who looked extremely scary in the memory, and the quiet one that sat beside her. She wondered if it was because she was actually doing the work, but shook her head and just tried to erase the image of her apprentice looking that intimidating. She really didn't want to see the polite girl she raised in such a state, even if it was probably her fault that the young medic Nin was so frightening. I raised her after all, she thought with no small amount of pride. The slug tamer quickly turned back to her work, wanting to be done with it before lunchtime while still absent-mindedly thinking of the time traveler. She marveled that he had developed such a technique, and once again thought about what a formidable opponent he probably was. Still, for whatever reason, she worried about him, maybe because of the memories she now had of him. Even if they were only a few, they were enough to make her care about the brat. But those thoughts soon passed, and she just wondered where he was at the moment, and what he was doing. He had just escorted them to the gates of Konoha before departing, telling her and Shizen that he had things to take care of before disappearing from sight. The only thing that he told them before going off was to look for the Sandaime, and to keep an eye on Naruto while he was away. When she told this to Sarutobi, her old sensei informed her that the time traveler had dropped in on him before they arrived, probably after he left them at the entrance of the village, and reported that they were just crossing the gates. She was sure that they talked about other things, since the old man was in a meeting with a few jonins when she reached his office. But whatever secret the third had, he wasn't telling, even if she knew it had to do with the Rokudaime of the future. It seemed that she wasn't allowed to know until she was sworn in as the fifth Hokage, since it was a Kage-level secret, or so she was told. The fact that she'd never heard about such a level just made her ninja senses twitch and prickle at the obviously made-up story. They were probably just discussing the release of Jiraiya's perverted new book, though she hoped that the young Hokage was not a pervert as well and it was just Sarutobi-sensei wanting to cajole some spoilers from the brat. If Nawaki was a pervert, he probably already knew what those books were about and had poked at the old Hokage's curiosity. The fact that her sensei was so tight-lipped about the whole thing only gave credence to her theory. She remembered acutely when he told her one time that he was a scholar of all types of literature as an explanation for him reading those damned books. She didn't want to think that the time traveler shared such perverted interests. He was too good for that. Or at least, she dearly hoped that he was. Regardless, he said he would return in a week or two and she would just find a way to trick him into speaking. She had some good memories of how to do it, and she thanked her own intelligence at sending those recollections as well. If not for them, Tsunade was sure that the time traveler would have been able to walk circles around her, probably knowing how she would react in most situations. It was cheating, of that she had no doubt, but thanks to some of her memories they were in a level playing field at the moment. They were ninjas after all. They were supposed to be sneaky and devious. As she finished with the last of the reports for the moment, she stretched and dismissed Shizen, telling her to check out the hospital and see how it was working, along with checking with the status of the personnel, both ninja and civilian alike. She had every intention of establishing that medic Nin program even if it needed to be tweaked a bit. For now, she just wanted to know how things were and how they could be improved. If she remembered correctly, Nawaki told her that he had a few tips for that as well, and seeing as he was from a future where she was Hokage for several years, those few tips would probably be based on fact. A ninja has to use every advantage at its disposal, and having a veritable fountain of information on the potential future of the village, well, they could easily use many of his suggestions and expand on them at the very least. As she walked the streets, she noticed that only the older generation recognized her, especially since it was more than a decade since she had set foot within this village, and even then, she just drew some curious glances as she made her way out of the administrative tower. Once in the village proper, she was overlooked and generally dismissed. She didn't look like a ninja after all. There were far weirder and more interesting looking shinobi than her. Then again, maybe her transformation technique was to blame. For now, she was glad for the anonymity. Unhurriedly, she made her way towards the park where the Sandame had told her she would find what she was looking for, but couldn't see her quarry. There were several groups of children playing around, running this way and that, and doing what brats did the best: make noise. Still, she kept a lookout for the head of short, golden blonde hair and kept her slow pace across the park, looking out of the corner of her eyes to see if she could spot him. It took her a few minutes before she saw the small boy peeking out from atop one of the tree branches, looking longingly at the playing children, his little legs dangling from the branch where he was perched at, trying to watch the park without garnering too much attention. If what she had heard was correct, most parents would glare at the boy until he moved out of sight. Therefore Tsunade decided to approach him with care, not wanting to scare him off. She just kept walking, making it seem as if she were looking for a spot to settle in before seeming to pick the shade of the exact same tree the boy was hiding in. She was sure there was a rule in the handbook that said that patience was amongst a ninja's greatest skills. So she put it to the test, making a show of looking this way and that, as if she were waiting or looking for someone, perhaps even sightseeing. It surprised her, close to an hour later, just how quiet the child had been, almost like his counterpart had been in that bar, even as he sat there atop his branch, with his chin poised on his folded knees, his arms surrounding his legs and his sad blue eyes always watching. It broke her heart a bit to see him like this. From her memories, the boy should have been an energetic loudmouth and a noisily idiotic brat. It made her wonder what made him that way in the first place. So she stayed in place and continued to pretend and watch. He had not moved and she knew he was watching her, probably looking for a means to get away without alerting her. If what Sarutobi-sensei had said was true, and she was beginning to believe that it was worse than what he had told her, then the boy would probably avoid her at all costs. Such was the reaction that the villagers had imprinted on him, to stay on the outside, looking in. However, luck was on her side and a low rumbling growl was heard from the tree above, followed by a sound that resembled some kind of muffled squeak. This was her chance. Smiling a small triumphant smile, knowing that she had outlasted the little bundle of energy. After all, she knew that the boy had an ungodly amount of stamina. She quickly settled her face into one of curiosity before looking up. What she saw looking back at her were the most impossibly blue eyes, widened because someone had caught him, and a red face, probably from embarrassment. She started to smile but was taken aback when the boy's expression seemed to change, as if he was expecting to be yelled at. He was bracing himself to be scolded, she realized. Or worse, as her smile faltered, she swore on her grandfather's grave that the council was going to suffer for this. But first things first, she slowly stood up, smiling at the little boy and joining him on his branch in one smooth leap. Naruto looked startled, and a brief look of amazement crossed his small whiskered face before it was replaced with apprehension. He knew all about ninjas, of course, since he wanted to be one himself, like old man Hokage, but he didn't expect this woman to be one too. Crouching down on the branch to be closer to his eye level, Tsunade went about trying to ease the child a bit, so she didn't make any moves to get near him and simply said a soft, "Hey there," still smiling from where she was, a small quirk of the lips, while she looked at him. Hello," he squeaked out, probably surprised that someone but the Hokage was talking to him. "What's your name, kid?" she asked, her tone curious, seeing that he was getting past his surprise even if the apprehension was still there. Noting his stance, she knew that he was ready to run at any second. A slight blush colored his whiskered cheeks before he spoke up. "Uzumaki Naruto," he said quietly, scratching the back of his head in an embarrassed way, but looking quite proud as well. Not many had ever asked his name like that, in a kind way, after all. Still smiling at the small, not as loud version of the brat in her memories, she decided to speak. "Well, my name is Tsunade, Uzumaki Naruto, and I've been looking for you for quite a bit. The Sandame Hokage told me everything about you, including that I could find you around here," she was saying, but the sound of his tummy rumbling and the red of his face interrupted her. "Well, he also told me that you might be hungry this time of the day. How about going with me for lunch?" she asked, amused at his scrunched-up face as he absorbed what she was saying. However, the enormous, squinty-eyed grin that he gave her after she finished speaking was enough of an answer. "Really?" he asked, his voice so full of hope that it almost broke her heart a bit more. Nodding, she gave him a small smile. "Really," she said firmly, and was not surprised to see just how happy he was after so simple a gesture. But she also frowned inwardly at the amount of trust that he was showing because of such simple a thing. However, on a second glance, it seemed that his smiles were hiding his suspicions and hesitation, since it took a great deal of reassurance and kindness to get him to come with her and down from his branch, and even then, he stayed a good distance away and just out of arm's reach until she proved her intentions to him. She got him to loosen up a bit by following Sarutobi-sensei's advice and taking the kid to a nice restaurant so he could get a good meal, even if it took one of her best glares and a few not-so-subtle threats so that they would serve him at all. Thankfully, the boy didn't notice any of this and enjoyed the meal immensely, chattering to his new friend as any exited soon-to-be 6-year-old would do, telling her about his favorite places in the village and how he was going to become a great ninja soon, seeing as he started in the academy in a few months, even if a few years too early, along with many other things. She wondered again what happened to make him a loud-mouthed brat by the age of 12. His wide smiles and exited eyes melted her heart bit by bit, especially when they became genuine, and she knew after that day that he was still the same child as the one she saw in her future memories. This time, however, he would not be neglected in the academy and his potential would not be atrophied by prejudice. He would have a chance to grow and learn unhampered by close-minded teachers and cold, unfeeling villagers. Looking at his small, smiling face as the boy spoke of his favorite ramen flavor, she made a silent promise to help him in whatever way she could. It was neither hot nor cold, even in this harsh environment. He made sure to avoid the worst of the weather while still remaining undetected, traveling at amazing speeds without leaving the faintest of traces. Time ticked against him, but he knew what to expect and how to react. He would arrive close to 5 days early to make sure that his timing was perfect, and that every eventuality was taken care of. To achieve what he wanted required precision and strategy. He could not let any stone unturned or uncovered. This was too important for his plans, which were made even before he arrived in the past. He had made a promise to do this, and he always kept his promises. It was his way of the ninja. Slowly, he made his way within the city, avoiding the patrols by climbing the massive walls and hiding his presence completely. He made no sound, or gave off any smell. No pebble was moved out of place as he made his way inside. Not even the sharpest of eyes could see him, since he could not be seen. Not even the shadows told of his passing as he looked for his quarry. How he wished he could just do this and hunt everyone who had made his life difficult. But he didn't have enough power or enough time to pull it off, and if he did that, as he selfishly wanted, it would leave Naruto defenseless in the long run, and that would result in an even worse outcome. At the moment, he was the only one who could teach him without making him complacent, the only one who could train him without making him arrogant, the only one who could help him achieve his full potential while allowing him to retain his humility, his humanity, and his compassion. Anyone else would simply try to mold young Naruto into the perfect weapon, cold, arrogant, emotionless, controllable, a tool. But he knew that his younger self had to grow and experience the world, and learn from his mistakes. He needed to accept himself and make his own way, allowing him to forge his own path. If anyone else were to train him at this point but him, they would force their will upon the boy and put pressure in the wrong places, probably breaking him in a way that could not be repaired, and could not be reversed. They would make him a monster, and those who could reach him enough to help would not be able to do so. He remembered from when he was made a genin, and even before that, when he was still in the academy. Many teachers had ignored him and his questions, allowing him to fall behind the class, subtly discouraging his learning and ignoring his lack of progress. He became stagnant in his education, and was soon firmly stuck in the end of the class, and not even when he reached Iruka-sensei's class could he catch up. Only his rivalry with Sasuke had carried him through his first months as a genin, and then his desire to fulfill his promise to Sakura and bring his teammate back had been all the motivation he needed. That was what allowed him to grow as strong as he was now. Where the academy teachers had snuffed his desire to learn, his determination to bring his best friend back had fueled his training. This time, with the right kind of encouragement, the young Naruto would be able to gain a better work ethic than he had in those years. He would make certain of it. Taking care, he quickly reached his location and prepared for what was to come and what he needed to do. He hoped that the Sandaime was not having problems with his requests since they were an integral part of his plans. If his request was not granted, then everything could turn 10 times more difficult. Still, he had faith in the old man, so he pushed that topic, along with the rest of his thoughts, out of his mind. At the moment, he just needed to keep watch and gather information. After all, he had an assassination to interrupt and a child to kidnap. This time, Sabaku no Gaara would not suffer for long. He would make sure of that. His innocence and humanity would stay intact. Insanity would not claim him this time around. "Hey, Ojizen!" A blonde bundle of energy called out from the door of his office in greeting, making him look up just in time to watch Naruto run in and bounce around before stopping beside him even as Tsunade closed the door with a look of exasperated fondness on her face. It seemed that she had already fallen for the child's charm. "Is it true? Is it true?" the young boy asked, pulling at one of the sleeves of his robe, rocking back and forth on the balls of his small sandaled feet. Taking a puff from his pipe, he closed the scroll he was reading with immense care, and avoided looking at the bouncing boy to avoid getting dizzy. What's more, it was greatly amusing to see when the blonde child started getting annoyed, even if he did this to teach him some patience. Though if he were truthful to himself, he would not be the best one to teach him that, because in the end he doubted that he even had half of the boy's energy. When he finally stored the scroll and turned his chair in the direction of the incessant tugging, Sandaime could not help but smile at the pouting look that Naruto had on his face, which changed a moment later into a brilliant smile when he answered the child's question with one of his own. "Is what true, Naruto-chan?" he asked the boy. Smiling sheepishly, Naruto simply pointed towards where Tsunade was standing, Her mouth quirked into a smile and her hands on the backrest of one of the chairs as the brat simply rubbed the back of his neck. Is it true that Obeiken is gonna be Hokage? Quirking an eyebrow at his former student, Sarutobi could see by her twitch that being called grandma was not exactly sitting well in her mind, seeing as she would turn 45 in a few days. Though it seemed that she wasn't completely adverse to it, what with Naruto still being alive and all, and what's more, without a bruise on him. If he guessed correctly, he would say that Tsunade had to probably tell the kid about the transformation technique she used to keep her youthful face and hide her real age, allowing her to look less than half her age. Making a note of asking her later, he looked down to the scrunched-up, disbelieving face of Kyuubi's vessel and just nodded in answer, outright laughing when his whiskered cheeks turned into complete doubt, while he still eyed the slug tamer with absolute awe. None but a child could pull off such an expression. Looking from the Sandaime to Tsunade Obaba, Naruto slowly made his way to the Sanin, who was now sitting in a chair and stopped right in front of her, a wide-eyed expression of his small face. Are you really as strong as Hokage Jiji? 'Cause he's the strongest ninja in the whole village, he asked, making wide-arm motions and looking at her serious face as she nodded. And nodding to himself, Naruto scrambled up into her lap to give her the best hug he could, his face turning serious. Or at least as serious as his mischievous face could get. I'm gonna be Hokage one day too, he stated clearly, as if revealing a great secret. Is that so? Sarutobi asked, extremely amused with how close the slug Sanin had gotten to the little boy in such a short amount of time. It seemed that the future was looking up for the young blonde. At that question, Naruto almost jumped out of his skin and scrambled from out of Tsunade's lap with an embarrassed smile and looked toward to future Hokage through his bangs. The medic Nin, for her part, just ruffled his hair and patted the seat right next to her, motioning for him to sit down. And why do you want to be Hokage, brat? She asked, puffing himself up proudly and almost toppling out of his chair in the process. Naruto just gave them a dazzling smile. I want to be Hokage 'cause that's the bestest ninja in the village, and all of the villagers look up to him, he exclaimed, pointing at Sandaime, and I'll be an even better Hokage than you, Ojaizen, he finished, his face full of determination. You know that it's not easy to be Hokage, right? Tsunade asked, somewhat surprised that the kid already had such high aspirations, even if he hadn't started the academy, and the reasons were not all there yet. Yeah. But I'm gonna work real hard, Naruto said, and kick lots of but when I get to be a ninja, he finished with a vigorous nod of his head and a look on his face that promised that he would kick their asses as well, when he was strong enough, of course. Tsunade just smirked, knowing that the kid never made false promises, even from an early age, it seemed. Well, I actually wanted to talk to you about that, Naruto, Sarutobi said, standing up from behind his desk, taking off his hat and placing it atop his desk before walking around and kneeling in front of the small boy so that they were at the same eye level. Just recently an opportunity opened up and someone who is stronger than both me and Tsunade asked me if he could be your teacher, he stated. Wide-eyed, the boy was speechless for a few moments before he whispered a question. Stronger than you, Ojaizen? He asked as if just that thought was impossible. And when he received a nod from Sarutobi, he slowly turned wide blue eyes towards Tsunade. And you Obeiken? When he got a nod of confirmation from her as well, he looked back at the third. His blue eyes reflected only amazement, hardly able to believe such a thing. And he wants to teach me? Came the whispered question. It seemed that the boy was stuck in disbelief. Yes, my boy, Sarutobi answered kindly, ruffling the child's messy hair. He asked specifically for you, he said when Naruto's attention was back on him once more. But you should know, you will have to work extremely hard and it will be very, very difficult, he explained, but quickly noticed the determined look in the boy's eyes. It will be completely different from the academy, you know. Not only because you will be learning a lot more things in a shorter amount of time, but because instead of just going to the academy in the morning and then having most of the afternoons free, if you accept, then you will be training and learning throughout the whole day, every day of the week for close to 5 years, when you will be allowed to take the Genin exam and become a shinobi of Konoha. Do you understand, Naruto? I understand, Ojaizen, the boy said, sounding astonished and excited that someone would want to teach him personally, someone even stronger than the Hokage, at that. And he knew with every fiber of his little heart that Sandaime Jiji was the strongest ninja in Konoha. Wonder poured out of his very pores as he felt the beginnings of something that he had never felt before. Acknowledgement. Whoever this teacher was, not only was he being praised by Old Man Hokage and Granny Tsunade, but he had asked for him. Naruto. He wanted to teach him, when everyone else in the village ignored him, gave him cold looks and acted as if he didn't even exist. Rubbing his eyes with the back of his hands, he looked up when he heard Tsunade talk to him again. You should also know, kid, Tsunade spoke up, getting the blonde child's attention, that your teacher already knows a lot about you and you should do everything he says and learn everything he teaches you, since you will never get another chance like this, she finished, brushing his bangs from his face. Naruto opened his mouth to say something but seemed to decide against it before starting to speak again, hesitantly. Why me? He asked. The slug tamer just chuckled slightly as she saw the scrunched-up face. Because you're a very special little boy, Naruto, and you deserve to learn from the best, she said. Besides, do you remember how most people treat you? She asked gently, only to receive a nod as he looked at his hands on his lap. Well, we are not sure that it won't happen in the academy as well, and we don't want to take the risk. We know that you could be the strongest ninja in this village if you work hard enough, and we just want you to reach that potential," she finished and noticed his blushing cheeks, but left him to his thoughts for the time being. Sandaime, for his part, just stood up and leaned against the edge of his desk, taking out his pipe and looking between Tsunade and Naruto with an obvious air of amusement. A look that, when noticed by his former student, was returned with a rather stubborn expression. However, before he could speak up, his attention was once again brought back to the young child. "And when will my training start, Ojizen?" "I mean, the academy starts in less than a year, right?" Naruto asked, still looking at his small hands with a slight frown. Taking a puff from his pipe, Sandaime just waited for the boy to look up from his lap before speaking. "Actually, Naruto-chan, your sensei will come and pick you up in just about a week or so," he explained, which gained a wide-eyed, excited look from the child. "So you need to pack up your apartment and buy everything you need before you leave." "Wait, Ojizen, where will I be going and what about my apartment?" he asked. Well, his attention was brought back to Tsunade as she answered some of his questions. "Your sensei is going to train you outside of the village, in a place where there won't be as many distractions. And since that training will last at least 5 years, it means that you won't need your apartment, and you can just get a better one when you get back, kid." By the end of her little explanation, Naruto was out of his chair and bouncing around in front of them, obviously excited, saying how cool it was that he had a personal sensei, and he could get to see the outside of the village, and soon started asking a whole bunch of questions one after the other. Sarutobi just shook his head and placed a hand on the child's shoulder. "Now, Naruto," he said to gain the boy's attention, even if it didn't stop the bouncing, though it was better described like a general vibrating since the boy's feet were firmly planted on the ground. Leaving that thought for later analysis into the mysteries of the universe, the third just looked down at the wide blue eyes, which were sparkling with suppressed energy. "Tsunade is going to help you with all of your shopping during the next couple of days. She has enough money that your sensei left to buy the supplies you will need for the next few months, along with a list of things that you will require. So you should go home and start sorting things out in your apartment, and begin getting everything ready, okay? Tsunade will go get you tomorrow morning to see how you did and to take you shopping. How about that?" He finished smiling, as the vibrating had escalated steadily during his instructions. When he finally released the boy's shoulder, Naruto was off like a flash, bobbing around and almost shouting words of victory and amazement, but ended up sounding like a stream of exited babble. When the bundle of energy reached the double doors, he just stopped for a fraction of a second and gave a small wave to them both before pulling the door open and scurrying towards his apartment, but not before shouting a loud goodbye to his Ojizen and Obeiken, leaving Tsunade's eyebrow twitching ever so slightly. After the door closed and complete silence returned to the office ever since the young boy stepped in, Tsunade turned toward her former teacher with a slightly dazed look on her amber eyes. "Talk about energetic," she murmured. Eyeing her, Sarutobi just took a puff from his pipe and walked toward the window. "Indeed," he stated, "but if what Nawaki said is true, then that energy was never properly directed in his years at the academy. He said that the first step with Naruto is to grab his complete attention and keep him interested while teaching him." He paused. "How that can be achieved eludes me at the moment. But if someone could do it, it would be him, don't you think?" he asked his former student, not turning away from his place. After all, he would be able to give Naruto his complete attention, and the boy is more of a hands-on learner. Looking towards the door from where the young blonde departed, she simply shook her head and looked towards the third's back before standing up. "Well, they are one and the same, so it stands to reason that if there were anyone alive at the moment that would know how to direct that much energy, then it would certainly be him," she stated and took her leave. She had a lot to think about, much of it centering on a blonde demon vessel, both present and future. But first, she needed to head over to her office and finish up any paperwork that might have accumulated since lunch. With a distracted farewell at the third, Tsunade went in search of shizen and maybe a warm bottle of sake after she was finished with work. Time is a fickle thing, he knew, but at the same instance there was nothing as precious when certain situations arose, and at the moment he could say with absolute certainty that he would need every second he could get to accomplish what needed to be done. After all, he was going to kidnap the Yondaime Kazekage's own son and Tsunade no Sato's very own Jinchuriki during the assassination attempt that would have cost the young redhead his sanity. The newly named Nawaki could not understand how a father could order the murder of his own son, especially one as sweet as Gaara was at the age of 5. True, the boy could not control the sand that seemed to protect him, or reacted to the fear and hatred directed at the young vessel from almost everyone in the village. But how can they expect a 5-year-old to subdue and control a tailed demon without any help? What was it that Gaara said? Yes, he hadn't been trained until after this incident, since they became too afraid of him at that point. This was a defining moment for the redhead, when the vessel of the one-tailed tanuki swore to love only himself, forsaking most of his humanity. It took him the better part of 3 days to reconcile the cold, emotionless and hollow Gaara with his younger, very sweet if a little sad version. And after seeing how the young vessel only wanted a friend to play with, a chance to rest, a hope to be like everyone else and simply be accepted and not feared, to understand why he was different and be cared about, only made his heart ache and his determination settle. He would not fail, he could not fail. Everything this past few days had gone according to what he had been told. He was glad that there are no permanent guards watching over the young boy, but he was sure that when Yashimaru, Gaara's uncle, made his attempt, there would undoubtedly be someone to see if the assassination mission was a success or not. After all, the man would be going for the suicide bomber approach, which allowed Nawaki some modicum of freedom with his actions. Still, as he watched the small boy, his eyes sad, staring at the moon and sky, unable to sleep for fear of losing himself and his personality, he could only hope that his timing was right. Slowly, he made his way toward the Sanin that had just arrived at the scene, taking an observational position, but paused when he noticed two more ninjas approaching. One of them was undoubtedly Gaara's uncle, the traitorous bastard. Considering all of the possible problems and finding the best solution, his 9 tails quickly appeared behind him, poised and ready, and with no more than a thought and his will molding his chakra, his body distorted and first one and then 2 exact clones of himself stepped out of his body, taking 1 tail each and leaving him with only 7 tails. It was a technique of his own creation, and it was the sole reason why Konoha had not fallen sooner, and the attacks on the village were kept at bay for so long. Without a word, each of his tailed clones, 1, disappeared in the direction of the 2 observers, where they would place a genjutsu of what they wanted to see, basically the successful assassination of a 5-year-old Jinchuriki, and allow him to intervene before that bastard Yashimaru spoke, and in so doing broke Gaara's spirit and crushed his hopes. It was on this night that Gaara proclaimed himself a monster. It was on this night where he found his bloody path of existence, and where Shikaka found a firm foothold in his soul, eating away at his personality until he was almost empty. However, that would not happen again, and with that thought he disappeared, not even leaving a grain of sand out of place. Yashimaru had already attacked Gaara and the bastard became the first victim of Gaara's infamous desert coffin technique. True, the technique was not even close to perfect and it needed some extreme fine-tuning, but it did the trick, and incapacitated his attacker. Knowing that this was the moment he was waiting for, he quickly confirmed that the 2 observing Sanins were completely under both of his clones' genjutsu before appearing right beside Yashimaru and placing a particularly powerful exploding note on his chest, where he knew all the other ones were located, before standing slowly and walking toward the clearly unstable and distraught Gaara, who was watching him through tear-filled eyes, his questions dying in his lips as he saw the tall blonde step over his attacker. 7 violet-colored foxtails splayed out behind him, their white tips glowing with a clear, violet-colored chakra, even as a huge explosion engulfed all 3 of them, causing the small boy to close his eyes. When the smoke cleared, all that could be seen was a great crater with bloody chakra-infused sand scattered all around as if in testament of the victim who died there. Some of the sand had even turned to glass and shattered into different size pieces because of the incredible heat. Nothing bigger than a few inches and some drops of blood remained, and even then, those had quickly dried and burned in the heat of the explosion. The 2 witnesses would report that the assassination of Sabaka no Gaara was a success, and the village hidden in the sand, Tsunade no Sato, would celebrate the elimination of that particular mistake. The vessel of the Tsunade no Shikaku was not mourned or missed by anyone. It would be more than 6 years later that those reports would be given a second glance, and by that time, when the reality of what happened that night is truly questioned, too much time would have passed, assumptions would be made and arguments would be raised. However, Tsunade would be able to do little else, as Gaara had never been a registered student in their ninja academy and could therefore not be persecuted as such, and even then, he would already be an extremely loyal Konoha shinobi, completely pleased with his home and his friends in the village hidden in the leaves. Somehow, the 2-tailed clones that stayed behind and made sure that the records and reports of the assassination were both misplaced and forgotten were never noticed, even as they disappeared with the wind a few days later. Someone would say, later on, that Sabaka no Gaara found a place and a family in the majestic tree of Konoha, becoming a sandy leaf within the ever-growing, evergreen canopy of the great shinobi village that resides in the country of fire, for he found peace within its branches. It was with no small amount of all that almost 6-year-old Uzumaki Naruto could, for the first time in his short life, claim true happiness. Yes, he had been glad that he would be able to become a ninja and go to the academy. Yes, he was joyful the few times when he had enough money left to buy ramen at Ichiraku's. And yes, he was thankful when Hokage Ojiken would visit him in the park or his apartment, or even invite him to his office when he had the time, even if it was only every few months. He cherished those few moments with the old Hokage since he was the only one who even gave him a second glace. The rest of the time he knew only loneliness, only cold hatred and spite. He was ignored and looked at with disdain, as if he were some irreparable stain upon the most expensive of tapestries. He had no friends, no family and only a small room to call home. His life was a living hell, not because he was beaten, since that had never happened, but because of the solitude, the absolute isolation that he experienced day in and day out. No human contact. No comfort. No love or care or even slight affection. Nothing. Where others could at least claim the companionship of friends, he had nothing but the trees of Konoha to keep him company. Where others can at least count on some kind stranger when in need of assistance, everyone turned their backs on him and in turn only spoke cold words about him. If he were ever in any danger, he knew that the only people who would bother to help him could be counted with the fingers of one of his small hands, and even then, he would have fingers to spare. He had his moments where he truly hated Konoha, and that hatred burned deep within his heart every time he was looked at with cold, unfeeling eyes. Yet those moments, even if they were getting more frequent as the years passed, did not last for long, and the memory of old man Hokage could always wash away those thoughts. Still, he refused to cry anymore. He had already shed enough tears, and he had promised himself not even a few months ago that he would not give the villagers the satisfaction of seeing him weep. He promised himself that he would become a ninja and grow strong enough to earn the respect of those around him, to make them see that he did not deserve their hatred. At that time, Sandai Mojaizen had helped him apply to the academy, and since that day he had been optimistic, even pleased, but never truly happy. He had long given up on wanting to know how happiness would feel. And even as each day passed, he learned to see the good side of things and became accustomed to being cheerful. He would be acknowledged someday, he was sure of it. He would fight for it tooth and nail. He would shout and he would run and he would make the villagers actually see him, and not turn their backs on him. But not in his wildest dreams had he thought that he would feel acknowledged quite so soon. He thought that years would have passed, and he would have had to wait until he was a great ninja with great deeds to his name, like the previous Hokages, to achieve that particular dream, the dream of recognition. But he was absolutely wrong, and he couldn't be happier because of it. It had been 3 days and he had already packed the few belongings he would need with Tsunade Obaken's help. He had been to see Hokage Gigi at least twice a day, every day, and he had helped Bachan arrange her office to her liking. At the same time, she also took him to eat to loads of different places, and while ramen was still his favorite, he could now say that some things came in a close second. All at once, she had also bought him new clothes and some cool ninja full-body training suits which were made from some black cloth and had mesh around the sleeves, collar and shins. He had tested it out, and it was very comfortable to move around in, meaning that he jumped and rolled with the outfit on for at least 2 days. Today, even as they ate, Bachan had told him that now they had to buy the supplies that his new teacher had asked for, and that they would need not only for training, but for where they would be living as well. When he asked, she told him a few things about his new sensei, but mostly said that he would have to wait to meet him, which would be in about 4 days, give or take a few. So they had that time to get everything ready. After they started buying all the stuff they would need, and he asked her why they needed so much, he was extremely happy that 2 more boys close to his age would be going to train with him as well, and become part of his ninja team when they made genin. Tsunade Obaken even said that sensei had picked them personally so that they would match with him and become his friends. Since he had never even played with anyone his own age, he didn't get jealous that he had to share his sensei. He had been prepared for the academy after all, and he was just happy that he would have some friends. He could just wish that they liked him too. Almost vibrating with happiness, Uzumaki Naruto found himself with new hope welling in his chest as he thought of how his sensei and his new friends would be. He couldn't wait to meet them and get to know them. From what Ojiken and Obaken had said, his sensei was very similar to him when he was younger, but refused to say anything else. When asked about the other 2 boys he would be training with, they said that they still didn't know who they were, and since something like this, where the teacher specifically chose his students, had never been done before, they had not even the faintest clue as to who else his sensei would pick or even how he would go about picking them. But they did tell him constantly just how rare this was and told him that he had to work very hard, which he promised to do. It was on that day, when he made that promise, 5 days after he was told of his sensei, that Tsunade told him that she knew he could become a great ninja and achieve his dreams. On that day she took her necklace from around her neck and gave it to him, telling him that it used to belong with her grandfather, the Shodai Hokage of Konoha. She told him that only a Hokage could wear that necklace, and since she would be sworn in just a few days, that she wanted him to have it and wear it when he became Hokage as well, giving him a kiss on top of his head and leaving him stunned for a couple of minutes, telling him to take good care of it, which he promised to do. She too acknowledged him, had faith in him. The smile on his face from that day on was blinding. His determination to make both the Sandaime and the soon-to-be Godame Hokage proud of him only grew, and he couldn't wait to be a ninja. He would prove to them that their faith and trust in him was not misplaced, and then he would prove it to the village and its people. As it was, news soon spread like wildfire across Konohagaku no Sato. Their village would soon have a new Hokage, as the council had finally backed the Sandaime selection and announced that the inauguration of the 5th-generation Fire Shadow of the Hidden Leaf would take place in 2 days, when Sarutobi would hand over the reins of the village to his previous student. Upon hearing this, almost every inhabitant of Konoha was happy, but those who had confronted the future Godame because of the Kyubi vessel's presence in their establishments turned white. A few reconsidered their views of the Jinchuriki when they saw how he interacted with Tsunade, happily chattering away with the slug tamer, as a nephew would with a favorite aunt. Few had seen the boy so happy and cheerful as when he was with the legendary medic, and this gave them pause. For the first time since the 9 Tails attacked, some questioned if they had not judged him wrong. Maybe, just maybe, he truly was just a normal child with a great burden. For his part, Sarutobi was already busy making the necessary arrangements for what Nawaki would need where they would be training. He had filled the paperwork and arranged for all of the things that had been requested of him for this particular project. He was amazed at the level of detail and thought that the young man had placed for what needed to be done, from what council members should be informed to which ones should be left in the dark. He named 2 members of the Konoha Council that are a risk for the village along with their subordinates, both present and future. There were even details on how to best do and file the paperwork as to not leave any trace, so that their little project could not be discovered until the time when they wanted it to be. The lengths that Nawaki was willing to go through were nothing short of spectacular. But as he saw it, and with the knowledge of what was to come, he could not see fault in any in it. It was all necessary. They had indeed grown both lax and lenient in the last few years. The loss of the Yondaime Hokage and such a great number of ninjas during the Kyuubi's attack left the village with other priorities, and as such, security suffered and Konoha could have reaped great consequences because of it. Still, there was hope yet to be found, and mistakes would not be made this time around. Luckily, they were now talking about what could have been and not what was. All thanks to the sacrifice of one person. Sighing, he lit his pipe and thought about what he had already done. He had sent Tenzo to prepare the selected training site. With his use of the wood element, he would be able to have everything ready in a matter of a couple of days, and Kakashi, who would be able to assist him, especially with all that furniture and equipment that they took within 4 giant scrolls. As things stood, Konoha would have an isolated, specialized, out-of-the-way training area for its use for years to come. He didn't know what modifications Nawaki would make to what Tenzo and Kakashi did, but he knew that when the young man was done, it would be the most secure training area that the village would have, even if it was about a day's travel from the village gates. Taking a puff from his pipe, he hoped that the future Rokudame's mission was going well. Even if he did not know all the details, he knew enough to be slightly worried. At the moment he was on a need-to-know basis, in case the subject was brought up before Nawaki returned. Not that if it was, he couldn't lie about it, of course, but the village was still not secure enough, and as much as he didn't like the idea, any slip, however improbable, could cause extreme amounts of damage to their plans. He just knew that Nawaki was searching for another Jinchuriki, and nothing more. He was extremely curious though, but he knew that only when the mission was done and its success or failure proven would the 6th Hokage of the future let him in of the finer details. For now, he just finished whatever work he needed to do and arranged a few meetings, 2 in particular catching his thoughts. After all, he needed to meet with Humano Irika to arrange for him to do monthly progress reports on the 3 boys that would be training under the Rokudame, and in so doing keep them listed in the files and records at the academy. This way, when the time came for them to take the graduation exams, all their records would be there, even if not completely accurate. After all, they would only be graded and tested on academy subjects. Truly, the young Hokage was unpredictable, if nothing else. No one would notice what was happening until it was needed, and when that moment came, everyone would be surprised. Or at least everyone but those selected who would end up knowing what was going on. Signing the last scroll on his desk and thus finishing his workload about 4 hours earlier than normal, the Sandaime Hokage, also known as the professor around and outside of Konoha, wondered why he never thought of selecting a successor earlier. The paperwork gets done faster that way. Gaara of the Sand, as he had grown up to be known, was sleeping peacefully for the first time in a long time, even as he was being carried at extreme speeds by a tailed Nin. Had he been awake he would have marveled in the surroundings as the deserts of Wind Country turned into the forests of the Land of Fire. Had he been aware, he would notice that he was particularly light, and would have been able to see his pale complexion, which had been denied sunlight since he was born. He would have noticed that his whole body was covered in violet-colored seals which surrounded another, incomplete seal that was done all in black. Had he not been in blissful unconsciousness, his mind finally allowed to rest, he would have noticed that his thoughts were uninterrupted and tranquil. He would have known what peace of mind felt like for the first time in his memory. Still, after years of not being able to rest, when forced into a coma, his mind jumped with joy, allowing him to dream sweet dreams. Had he been able to open his eyes he would have seen a peculiar sight, for the violet eyes of the person who was carrying him held a particular look in them, one of complete puzzlement and amazement. After all, after knowing someone for so many years, it must be quite difficult to find out that they actually had eyebrows, when nothing had suggested it before. They must have been under all that sand. Weird. It was a monumental discovery. It would be almost on par with the possibility of seeing both fuzzy brows and his sensei without any eyebrows at all. He shuddered at that. And with that thought firmly pushed out of his mind, Nawaki kept up his pace. He would arrive at Konoha during the late afternoon of the next day. At the moment, Mother Night covered his speeding shape and only the reflection of his pupils, which almost obscured his irises, could even be seen. There are many peculiar things and even more unusual traditions within the lands of the elemental continent, and especially within the ninjas that are but a part of its population. Regular civilians have different reactions to them, from awe and respect, to fear and apprehension. Every child born within the elemental lands knows what a shinobi is, and many legends and tales have been passed from parent to child for countless generations, telling of the great feats that they were capable of doing, from acts of the greatest kindness and wisdom, to actions so cold and ruthlessness that it brought fear to many a young heart. Yet, even if the general public doesn't know of these unusual quirks of ninja society, except perhaps those who live within their villages, almost all shinobi from every corner of the continent follow them, like wearing the identifying mark of their forehead protector, which even missing nins continue to use, for whatever reason, maybe because it gives them a sense of pride, identity, or belonging, who knows. Every ninja, even if they are hiding or running away, on a mission or when outside of their village, forever wear their Hatai 8 on their person. It is a way to say where they came from, or in the case of missing Nin, who they are forsaking. However, within the many things that shinobi indulge in, recognition is one of the only things that they get awarded with, whether they like it or not, by their friends, enemies, and comrades. Seeing as the ninja profession is one of secrets and shadows, it is understandable that when they give their respect and recognition to other ninjas, it is in a very atypical way. Shinobi are not awarded material things besides their payment for a successful mission, or the thanks and gratitude of their village and clients. For when a ninja becomes known by others due to their deeds and actions, they make a name for themselves, although it is unusual that they have any hand in it. Almost every prominent ninja, both dead and alive, is given a name by their peers for prosperity, maybe as a way to acknowledge their skills or their actions, for their names are sometimes the only thing that remains of their legacy. It is one of the highest forms of respect within their society. These names vary in great degrees, from a title or variation of their birth name, to a characterization quirk that defines them. It could originate because of a specific technique that they favored, like Konoha's Yellow Flash, the fourth Hokage of the Leaf, named thus because of his infamous Flying Thunder God technique, or like Konoha's White Fang, Hataki Sakumo, who was known for wielding the famous white tanto that gave him this name. Maybe they are given a name because of their tendencies, as copycat ninja Hataki Kakashi, who knows over 1,000 techniques yet only one of which is originally his, can testify. But then, from those ninjas who have made a name for themselves, there are those who surpass understanding and are deemed as legends, such is the impact that they have had upon the world. 3 such individuals were the students of the professor, the Sandaime Hokage of Konoha, who was recognized for knowing and actually using all of Konoha's techniques, which number in the thousands. The 3 students of his team, unlike any other team in Konoha, each became a great individual force and tremendously powerful, each displaying different talents, yet becoming almost equally strong, and even then, never as powerful as they were together, for which they were named the Sanin by Sensho no Hanzo. Later on, when they searched and contacted the particular animals that now distinguished them from their other comrades, and gained that animal's blessing to summon their kind, that name evolved and they became known as the legendary 3 ninjas, or the Densetsu no Sanin. Since then they have been called as such: Tsunade, the slug tamer, Orochimaru, the snake handler, and Jiraiya, the toad hermit. Since then, they have always been the Sanin, the 3, the great summoners, better together than apart, for together they were unstoppable. What, Sarutobi questioned himself as he looked upon the sealed and carved box on his desk. Would the remainder of his students be called now? Would they become the legendary 2 ninjas? The Ninin? Would Orochimaru be remembered as anything but a traitorous snake? Or would that particular name fade into the history books of the world as legend, nothing more than a memory of a time when a team of ninja as a whole gained so much respect? Maybe, just maybe, when future generations speak of the Sanin, they will speak of them with awe and wonder, and they will remember them as they once were, as 3 parts of a whole and not as a friendship broken by betrayal. Chuckling softly at the direction of his thoughts, the Sandaime simply relit his pipe and took a puff from it, looking out of the window to see the morning light stream atop the treetops of Konohagakure and enter his office, illuminating the spacious interior. Truly, it is no small wonder that so many great shinobi come from this very village, even when peace was so abundant within it. However, things must be put into motion, and he had waited too long for this, seeing that just this afternoon he would be stepping down from his position as Hokage. Looking at his desk once more, he called for one of the guards at the door. This would be the last thing he did before stepping down, and even if he was not the one who accomplished it, it was a weight that was lifted from his shoulders. Even if it was someone else who had to step in and clear up his mistakes, he was glad that his beloved village would not have to suffer because of them. So, when he heard the doors open, he simply turned around and offered a nod of acknowledgement to Tsunade, who took a look at the almost empty desk and just walked to the other side of it, remaining silent as the doors opened again and a messenger walked in, standing at attention in front of the desk. Next, several squads of Hunter Nin and Anbu appeared in clouds of smoke, all with their masks on, which was a sight to behold. Rarely, if ever, were the Black Ops and Hunter squads of Konoha called for such an open meeting, since their orders and assignments usually followed different channels, even if the missions themselves came from the Hokage's desk. But then, this gathering was not what anyone would call common, so normal protocol was not followed. This operation could not go on record until its completion and all the variables that composed the situation were under control. Konoha didn't have the luxury to do this task in steps or at its leisure. It took Nawaki to point it out, but once his attention was brought forward, he could not deny that they had been infiltrated by their enemies, and that enemies had grown from their own branches. But no longer. Tainted leaves would be pruned so that the whole of Konoha does not suffer. Turning and nodding at those assembled in his roomy office, Sarutobi walked from his previous place at the window and stopped beside his desk where a series of scrolls were located and looked at those present. He remained perfectly relaxed as the doors opened once more and 3 Chunin teams and their Jonin leaders took their place behind the masked Nins, taking the same formation as those already present and arranging themselves by teams. Good, everyone is here. He nodded again at those assembled and they stood at attention, This will be my last act as Sandaime Hokage of Konohagakure no Sato before I hand this position over to the newly appointed Godaime Hokage, he said, nodding at Tsunade who stood there, her face impassive and her arms crossed, the incessant tapping of her heeled shoe the only source of noise in the room. These are the last missions on my desk and the last orders that I will give out in this capacity for what I hope will be the last time. He chuckled sadly as he remembered doing this before the Yondaime was sworn in. So it is with great relief that I announce the defeat of my former pupil, Orochimaru. Pausing as he watched the reactions of those present, he saw a few almost gasp, others tense, obviously restraining their reactions, while others remained inexpressive save for the widening of their eyes. Hunter Nin Fire Squad 9, he ordered as he took the sealed box in his aging hands and gave it to the leader of the squad, the swirling red patterns of his mask standing out against the white. Here lies Orochimaru's head, process it and verify his identity. When you have confirmation, have the bingo book updated and send word to the other villages, he said and gave 2 scrolls to the second in command. His death is to be accredited to Konoha, and even though the one responsible wishes to remain anonymous, the reward for Orochimaru's head will be placed in the account listed on the first scroll. The second scroll contains information on one of Orochimaru's closest associates, and his last known location, along with mission details. You are to find him and bring us his head, understood? Hi, Sandaime Hokage-sama, came the reply. Good, you will report to the Godaime upon the completion of your assignment. Dismissed, he waved a hand and immediately the Hunter Nin squad dispersed, already on their way to accomplishing their mission. Looking at the remaining teams of Hunter Nins, he picked out 5 scrolls from his desk and called for each squad, giving them the appropriate scroll with their mission directives. We have information of Orochimaru's movements and many of his contacts and associates. You are to find your targets and capture them. Deadly force is authorized if you are met with resistance. Report to the Godaime upon your arrival, understood? Hi, Sandaime Hokage-sama. And with that all Hunter Nin squads departed, knowing that all the information they needed were within the scrolls he gave them. Turning to the MBU squads, he just took the scrolls from his desk and handed it to the captains of each team. There are traitors within our walls. Find them and apprehend them. It was short and to the point. The scroll had all other details. After all, you are to take them to torture and interrogation where they will be processed. Stand guard over them until such a time as it is not longer needed. Report directly to me upon the completion of this operation. Be swift, act as one. Hi, Hokage-sama, came the reply from the masked Nins, as they too disappeared. He knew that they would locate their targets and coordinate their efforts to apprehend them all at once, and in doing so avoiding any chance of communication between them. It is a good thing that Nawaki had given them a thorough list of those whose mechanizations were against the village's well-being and prosperity. Adjusting his hat, he turned to the desk once more. He turned to the 3 Chunin teams in front of him and gave each of the Jonin leaders a scroll with their mission's parameters. You are to investigate the sites listed in those scrolls, bring any information that you find and destroy the rest. Capture any shinobi you encounter and after they are subdued request a Hunter Nin squad for pickup. Understood? Good, then go. He finished, seeing as there were only 3 more scrolls atop his desk. The messenger stepped forward at Sarutobi's signal and took the 2 scrolls that were handed to him. Sound the signals for the gates to be closed and the patrols to double until ANBU has everything under control, he ordered and nodded to the first scroll. That scroll contains the security protocols that are to be followed. No one must notice our movements. We must not give ourselves away prematurely. Is that clear? Good. The second is a message to Jiraiya. You know how to send it. Dismissed. Hi, Hokage-sama. Finally taking the last scroll in hand, he waited for his office to clear out, leaving only Tsunade and himself before calling for the guard and asking him to lead the representative of the council that he had summoned inside. When the door closed and without exchanging any pleasantries he just handed the council member the scroll, and waited for it to be opened and read, knowing by the widening of the eyes that the message was understood. There would be meetings in a week where he would take an active position within the elders of the council, as a direct advisor to the Godaime, and in so doing, strike almost all of the council's power from their hands. They would regret having gone against him so many times since the Kyuubi's attack, and he was certainly looking forward to putting them in their place. They had been wrong to restrict his movements when he had been appointed as Hokage after the death of the fourth. He would see to it that the system would return to what it was while they were still at war, where the elders, which with him came up to 3 members, would be the counterbalance for the Hokage's power and not the whole of the council. The fact that he would support Tsunade notwithstanding, the elders could only intervene with the Hokage's decisions when they were all in agreement. And he didn't plan on agreeing with them too much. He would make sure that by the time the Rokudaime was selected, the council would be disbanded and Konoha's system was as it had been in the past. As it was at the moment, there were too many power-hungry individuals in the council, and they only thought about themselves. If he had wanted such people running the village, he would have appointed Orochimaru as the Yondaime, but those were thoughts for another day. Looking at Tsunade, Sarutobi nodded, taking off his hat and placing it on his empty desk after the council member left the office. And what a beautiful sight that was. No paperwork, no mission reports, nothing. You have something to say, Tsunade, he finally asked, relighting his pipe before moving around and arranging a few things that were out of place. Smirking, she just stood there, Watching his movements with her arms across her chest, Nawaki sent a message. He will be here by late afternoon. Quirking an eyebrow at the lack of further information, he just took a puff from his pipe and turned to look out the window. Konoha was extremely busy today, preparing as it was to celebrate their new Kage. It was the perfect cover for the ANBU to do their jobs. Everyone expects more patrols during these kinds of activities, so their movements would not be noticed. As for the time traveler, he was very interested in what he had been up to. After reading the majority of the reports on what could happen, he knew that swift and extreme measures had to be used. Still, until the young man had everything under control, he only had the most basic of information. He sighed, knowing that his curiosity was going to lose when matched against Tsunade's patience and her wish to make an old man like him ask questions, so he just turned slightly and gave her the satisfaction, and, short and to the point, he was not going to lose all of his dignity if he could help it. Still smirking, the medic Nin paused for a moment and leaned against the desk before she simply explained, his mission was a success. He has the subject and is requesting that we move along with our plans and make arrangements for a meeting for tonight, preferably in the Hokage's residence. He said that privacy was paramount. Ah! Sarutobi exclaimed good-naturedly, that is good news, indeed. I will make the arrangements so that you can have the time to get ready for your inauguration. I imagine that he will need accommodations for the next few days. At her answering nod, he just moved toward his desk and began to write the summons for tonight's meeting. When he finished, he rolled up the scroll and called a messenger to deliver it. There, I will go and make sure that accommodations are prepared for him, just in case he arrives earlier than expected. Excellent, Tsunade responded, pushing herself from the desk and making her way towards the door, knowing that her business with her former sensei was done for the moment. However, before she reached the door, she turned towards the old man, a smirk still firmly planted on her face. It seems, Sarutobi-sensei, that our next official meeting will be in my office, any? She asked in a teasing tone of voice before stepping out and going on her way. The Sandaime gave a hearty laugh, quite content that he wouldn't have to spend so much time in any office from now on. Really, why hadn't he looked for a successor earlier than this? He would have to thank that young man when he next saw him. He really couldn't think of a better godame for Konohagakure no Sato than Tsunade, though if he was sincere with himself, he knew that no one would have been able to convince the medic Nin to take the position before the time traveler came along. He paused, thinking. Which brings the question of exactly how was Tsunade convinced so easily? The more he thought about it, the more it occurred to him that that particular question had been avoided by them at every turn. Huffing, he prepared to leave to the Hokage's residence. It seemed that he would have to get sneakier in his questioning. It seemed to him that he had just missed the party. Damn. He was just going to have to hope that Shizen was a fair player. If not, he'd be forced to interrogate a few people to make sure she didn't cheat. After all, she was a ninja and he didn't want to lose the bet they made, so he would have to head off any attempted sneakiness that the attendant might try, not that he thought that she could fool him in any case. He didn't get to be a Kage by being stupid. No, he was almost 100% sure that Tsunade would have sent herself a memory of her own inauguration to save her younger self the effort of thinking something up. He knew how the medic Nin hated writing speeches. Smirking, he remembered Shizen's face when he had made that comment and the expression of disbelief that she had worn. So they had made a wager, and he had given her a transcript of the speech Tsunade had used when she had been made godame in his time. Truly, he knew the old hag too well. It was the easiest meal he would get. He just hoped that the young attendant had enough money, since it had been some time since he indulged in a few bowls of ramen. Smiling ruefully, he adjusted his grip on the bundle he was carrying and diminished his speed. It was close to 5 in the afternoon, and he was sure that the inauguration was after 3, so the villagers were probably out celebrating. Still, he was satisfied with the side effects of the event since most of the population was near the center of Konoha and it allowed him to take the roundabout way toward the Hokage's residence, which was close to the eastern wall and almost beside the mountain monument. Taking care to go in without being noticed was a bit more difficult when your hands are full with a 5-year-old demon vessel, and he found it strange that the patrols were so tight. It seemed that something else was afoot, but he'd wait and ask the old man about it later. Right now, he just wanted to get some rest. Or better yet, some food. He was really hungry. Then, seeing a slight opening in their guard, since they seemed more concerned on keeping watch of those going out more than those going in, he quickly took it, avoiding detection by cutting across several empty training areas and around many backstreets until he emerged close to his destination. With a quick inspection of his surroundings and a rapid assessment of the situation, he moved silently into the house, heading straight to the top floor, where the guest bedrooms were located. On a whole, that was easier than he had thought. For some reason he had imagined having to fight half of Suna before he could take Gaara, and even then, he thought that he would have to at least exchange some witty conversation with the Kazekage or something of the like before he'd have to knock them down and kidnap their little failed weapon. But then, he had always been told that he had a rather wild imagination. That thought, however, brought him to the matter at hand. Looking down at the peacefully comatose 5-year-old, he gently placed him on the bed, taking care to remove the sandy sandals and the small tunic wrapping thing that covered his arms and chest, leaving the boy in long pants and a sleeveless shirt. When he felt a presence enter the room, he simply ignored it and continued assessing the boy's condition as well as the state of the seals that covered the entirety of his small body. It was something that he developed when he was looking for a way to subdue the Kyuubi and gain control of its chakra. It would first bind the demon, interrupting whatever influence it had on its vessel, and help repair, reinforce or remake the seal that contained it, adjusting it in such a way that the vessel would not suffer any side effects from the merging. It took insane amounts of chakra, and the seal's script, one, was incredibly hard to pull off, but the benefits outweighed the risks, since in the end the seal would reform and change to allow the vessel to slowly master the demon's chakra, either by absorbing it and assimilating it completely or by helping the vessel conquer and overwhelm the demon's soul. For all intents and purposes, the seal was alive. And he would need to do was guide it so that it did not damage Gaara in any way. Whatever the case, he would have to see what method of training would be best for the young redhead. But it was best to worry about the present first, so he pushed those thoughts out of his mind. He gave a distracted nod at the third, who was observing the seals on the boy, and proceeded to diagnose his health, which was one of the few healing techniques that he could pull off without having to rely on Seal's script himself. Placing his glowing hands atop the small body and scanning him, he took note of the results and nodded, relieved. The boy was healthy, good. Just a bit dehydrated and with almost severe mental fatigue, but it was nothing that couldn't be helped with either some water or the regenerative rest that the seal-induced healing sleep afforded. True, he would have a lot of explaining to do to the kid when he woke up, but that was nothing if not expected. He just hoped that his mind could cope with the abrupt changes. He would need to ask Tsunade to give him a complete examination just to make sure. The Sandaime, who had remained silent while he checked on the boy, finally fed his curiosity and started analyzing the seal's script, looking completely fascinated. "I take it that this is the Jinchuriki?" He asked the obvious question, which he nodded absently at as he waited for the old man to finish his cursory glance. He was interested in the Hokage's reaction when he lifted the shirt to see the original seal, which was woefully insufficient. Startled, he just took a longer look and asked, not looking up, "How is the child?" After a small thoughtful pause in which he gathered his thoughts, he answered, "At the moment he needs his rest while the seal that I placed on him does its work. I think that he will be unconscious for at least 5 days, but it depends on how weak the original seal was. He is mentally exhausted, but nothing that Tsunade cannot fix and cannot be remedied with some sleep." "And which bijou does he hold?" The old man continued his questioning, making Nawaki realize just by the way the question was asked why they called him the professor. "He is the vessel of the Ichibi no Tanuki, or the one-tailed demon raccoon dog, Shikaku of the Sand," he answered calmly, predicting the startled expression and slight pause in the Sandaime's study of the seals. But he had to give the old man some credit. If he had not been looking for it, he would not have noticed. "Yes, this is Sabaku no Gaara, the Yandaime Kazekage's youngest son." When the third stayed silent, he just decided to explain the situation and the basis for his decision. After all, even if he was pretty hungry, he doubted that he would be able to eat until the old man was at least appeased. So he explained about the circumstances of the sealing of Shikaku into Gaara, the manifestation of the sand, the treatment of the villagers, and how the boy received no help in controlling his burden. He told of how the Kazekage had ordered the assassination of his son, how this was the first attempt, and how the assassination attempts would have continued if he had not interfered. He expanded on what had happened in his time, and after most of the explanations were done, he told the Sandaime about how he accomplished his mission, commenting on how it had been easier than he had expected. "At the moment, and for all intents and purposes, Sabaku no Gaara is dead in the eyes of Tsunade no Sato, and his assassination was a success," he finished. "Now we just need to wait for a bit and register him as a shinobi of Konoha. I have a copy of all of his personal records for when they are needed." Nodding, Sarutobi finished his cursory inspection of the seal and tucked the boy in, motioning for Nawaki to follow him. "We will leave him here until Tsunade can have a look at him later this evening. I'm sure that you need to rest as well." "Not so much rest, old man, as food," he said, chuckling slightly as they made their way to the kitchen. "I can go for long periods of time without rest, but it means that I need to eat more to compensate, and really, food pills are not very satisfying." "I can imagine that." "Sit down then, my boy, I was expecting you already, so there is a meal waiting for you." "Yash." "Thanks, old man." Shaking his head at the young man's antics, but appreciating his cheerfulness, he went into the kitchen to take out what had been prepared earlier. Truthfully, it lightened his heart to see a smile on his masked face. Until now, he had only seen the young Hokage's face set into thoughtful, or frowning expressions, or only with a slight twitch of the lips to show his amusement, and even that was difficult to spot. It seemed that much of his stoicism was due to his worry over the red-headed boy that lay in one of the guest rooms. But for whatever reason, he was just glad to see that there was still some of the energetic child that he knew in there somewhere, even after all the hardships he has faced. In the end, it took quite a bit to satisfy Nawaki's hunger, which would explain why he had asked for so many supplies for their first few months at the training grounds he had sent Tenzo and Kakashi to arrange. But he was still glad. It was good to see some life in this old house. They talked about a series of things as well, from the happenings in the village while he was away, to Tsunade's inauguration. For some reason, when he had spoken of the Godame's speech, the young man had cracked up laughing. When asked, the young Hokage only said that he had won a bet, but avoided speaking of the terms of the wager. So he just resigned himself and moved on to another topic. When they moved to the room where tonight's meeting would take place, both young and old Hokages began discussing the most recent events, theorizing on the repercussions of some of their actions, and what their options were at the moment. It was this facet of the young man that he had known since his arrival. That quiet, confident and assertive side that knew all the answers and could make plans for every eventuality. Those qualities alone would have made him a good candidate for Hokage. The fact that he was incredibly skilled was probably just a bonus. It was during these short moments with the time traveler that he saw what little Naruto could become. Truly, the child might very well become the greatest of all Hokages. The proof was sitting in front of him, after all. Suddenly, Nawaki's face closed off and he was standing up and moving, as silent as a whisper of wind. And before he could say anything, the young man just melted into the wall. How in Kami-sama's name the youngster did that, he didn't know, but he would try and see if he would be willing to teach it. After all, the common method to achieve this effect was either ninjutsu or genjutsu, and he had not felt either of those being executed. Then he heard it, footsteps. He recognized Tsunade's voice only moments later, so he stayed in place, knowing that his former student would know to bring the guest to this room. But meanwhile, he entertained himself by trying to detect where Nawaki was and failed miserably. However, the next moment, the person they were waiting for came in, so he stood to greet him with a nod. Hayashi, Sandame-sama, thank you for coming on such short notice, please. He gestured for the clan head to take a seat. Tsunade, he said in way of greeting, waving her into a seat before turning to Tsunade's apprentice, Shizen-chan. If you go to the guest bedrooms, you will find that there is someone there who needs your assistance. Could you keep an eye on him? Of course, Sandame-sama, she answered, probably knowing about the young vessel already. Good, thank you Shizen-chan. And with that the attendant headed out. Young Gaara would be taken care of while this meeting took place. And while the new arrivals served themselves some tea, he pulled out his pipe and lit it, taking a couple of puffs. It was then that he noticed that Nawaki's tea serving had also disappeared. Truthfully, perhaps he was getting too old for the ninja business. He hadn't even thought of that. After taking a sip, the Hyuga patriarch spoke up. Now, Sandame-sama, Godame-sama, what would be the purpose of this meeting? Especially one that would require such arrangements to be made. It was true, very few meetings took place in the Hokage's residence, even if it was one of the most secure places in the village. Two things, really, Tsunade spoke up, always blunt and to the point. Someone has requested to meet you and he has a proposal for you that would greatly influence the future of your clan. Impassive as always, the Hyuga patriarch only tilted an eyebrow in response. And if this person is the one who has requested my presence, then why is he not in this room? Because, Hayashi, Sandame answered, his mere existence is a secret so classified that only 3 people know of it. If there were a ranking above that of S-class, his existence would garner its use. He paused, gathering his thoughts. It is because of this that we must get your word of honor as a Hyuga that what you learn here today will not be told to anyone who doesn't have his express permission or our joint authorization. Take note that to reveal the secret could very well lead to the end of Konoha and your death. Hyuga Hayashi, for his part, was greatly unnerved by the force of the Sandame's words and their meaning, even if he gave no outward sign of it. He rightly deduced that only the 2 Kages and the Godame's attendant knew of this. But his role in the whole scheme was completely unknown. The fact that he could not read anything from the 2 Kages and that no more information would be forthcoming until he agreed to their terms was a credit to them. Everyone knew that a Hyuga would protect the clan's honor above even their own lives. However, if this mystery individual had anything that could involve his clan, then his decision had already been made. Very well, I give you my word as the head of the Hyuga clan and the honor of the Hyuga name that I will not repeat, divulge or discuss what I learn here this day unless it is with express permission. Good. The voice almost made him jump out of his skin. He was immediately on alert, but any action he might have wanted to take died in his lips as a tall figure stepped out of the wall directly in front of him. The young man had the most startling eyes he had ever seen, and that was saying something. The fact that the pupils were elongated only brought more attention to them. The fact that he couldn't sense him at first, and could not read him now impressed him to no end. Still, his nerves were tingling, and only the fact that the Sandame and Godame seemed to have been expecting the young man kept him from standing up and falling into a defensive position. He just barely kept his Byakugan, too, from activating at that. The young man just eyed him with amusement as if he had expected his reaction and was just waiting for him to crack. Hyuga-sama, came the greeting along with a small respectful bow, taking him slightly by surprise, before he sat across the table and beside the Sandame. I will try to get to the point, since we have much to discuss, so I will get the introductions out of the way. I am Uzumaki Naruto, previous container of the Kyubi no Kitsune or 9-tailed demon fox. At this, he just allowed his 9 violet-colored tails to show, and future Rokudame Hokage of Konohagakure no Sato, and all of this was said with a straight face. He was surprised to say the least, and this time he could scarcely keep the completely gobsmacked expression from his face. Each one of these claims was more impossible than the next. He was almost on the verge of denying it when a sharp voice snapped him out of his disbelief. Use your Byakugan, Hyuga-sama, and he did. The veins on the sides of his eyes became visible almost immediately, even as his pupil-less eyes took a slightly silvery hue. What he saw would have made him gasp in shock if he had not been speechless, and it would have made him stumble if he had not been seated. So he was lucky enough to keep some of his dignity intact. The young man in front of him was an impossibility. He had the thickest chakra coils that he had ever seen, and not only that, but his chakra was almost solid, it was so dense. If he had to compare it to a regular shinobi's, he would say that it was like comparing mist to the sap of a tree. It swirled around but almost didn't move, and then he saw them, seals. There were seals everywhere within his chakra system, helping in the use and storage of so much energy. Even his muscles had a constant amount of chakra coursing through them, and last but probably not least came what he was intended to see, for around his navel stood the Shiki Fujin, 3, that kept the Nine Tails prisoner, or at least had kept him prisoner, and even if the 8 trigram sealing style, 4, was absent, which can only mean that he had absorbed all of the demon's chakra, there was no mistaking it or denying it. Truly, no one else had that particular seal as it was created shortly before the Kyuubi attached, and then only used once. The young, 20-year-old man in front of him was Uzumaki Naruto, when he knew for a fact that the Jinchuriki was only 5, almost 6 years of age. Either he was telling the truth, or some crazy bastard invented an aging technique. He doubted it was the latter. However, his attention was drawn to the Sandaime when the old man let out a quiet chuckle. Do not worry, Hayashi, it caught us by surprise as well. You should be aware, however, that I have already identified and confirmed his claim to the title of 6th Hokage. Nodding and calming his nerves as only a ninja can, he accepted the information given to him and stored it for careful examination at a later date. I can understand the need for secrecy. I would imagine that the Godaime's presence and Orochimaru's death can be attributed to your involvement. Rumors were probably spreading quicker than they had anticipated if knowledge of Orochimaru's death was already known by the clan head. Then again, the man has the uncanny ability to know most of what was going on in Konoha. He did have eyes everywhere after all. Hi, Hyuga-sama, came the quiet answer. By sacrificing all but 5 years of my life when summoning the Time God, and expending almost all of my chakra in the process, I was able to come back 15 years. It was our last resort, and it worked. This time Orochimaru won't be able to form his own village and invade us. The Sandaime won't die prematurely, leaving the village leaderless after an attack. Treason will be avoided. This time around, Konoha will be strong enough, but like I said before, I will try to make this meeting as concise as possible. You will have 4 days to consider my proposal, keeping in mind that the Sandaime and Godaime can answer any and all questions that you may have during that period of time. As for the reason that I won't be available myself, well, if you would concentrate your sight upon the guest bedrooms? Good, that boy is a Jinchuriki as well. Those seals are of my own creation and are working as we speak to bind the bijou within him so that he can better control its power. As you can no doubt figure out, I just brought him into the village and I will be personally monitoring those seals until they are stable. For lack of a better explanation, I will just say that those seals are ever-changing and they need constant supervision until they settle. That process will take 4 days at most. Pausing while the Hyuga patriarch deactivated his bloodline limit and turned his attention back to him, giving a nod, I understand, and Hyuga Hayashi did indeed understand. Those were great accomplishments, to be sure, but he still did not grasp why they would risk such an advantage by telling him. As he saw it, the less people who knew, the better. So he decided to voice these thoughts. What I don't comprehend is what you might need that I could assist you with. I can appreciate the possibilities of the knowledge you poses in regards to Konoha in general, but why would you risk revealing this to me, when anything having to do with my clan can be proposed indirectly through the Godaime? Simple, Hyuga-sama, I have but 5 years left to live, as I mentioned, and my power is not yet fully restored. It's taken almost 5 months to recover half of my chakra, and it will take more than 5 months more before I am at full strength. I have neither the time nor the power needed to do much more by direct intervention. So I will be spending the time that I do have training the young Naruto personally so that he does not have to suffer as I did to finally gain control over Kyuubi's chakra and so that he can do what I will be unable to accomplish. As I see it, this is a better investment of the years that I have left, along with helping the Sandaime and Godaime prepare the village for what is to come so that it will be strong enough to survive and triumph. I see. It was worrying to hear such things, and the sense of urgency on the young man's voice was not lost to him. His time was truly short, and although he knew that a lot of details were missing, the message was still loud and clear. He would make sure to ask the Sandaime about more of these details later. For now, however, he concentrated on what was being said. The biggest risk that we faced was the combined might of 10 S-class missing mean from all over the elemental lands who were harnessing the powers of the bijou. When Konoha was about to fall under their attacks, I used the technique that sent me back at time. If it succeeded, I could warn Konoha of what was to come as I have already done, and if it failed I died and the powers of the Kyuubi died with me. At least then they wouldn't have been able to complete their plans. Taking a sip of tea, he put his cup down and folded his hands as stared at the Hyuga patriarch. However, as I will already be training young Naruto and his fellow Jinchuriki upstairs, I thought that training a complete team from scratch would be more beneficial in the long run. Since they will grow, learn and work together from such an early age, I can nurture their friendship and teamwork at the same time that I teach them everything that I can. Leaning forward slightly, the intensity in his eyes could be seen by everyone in the room. By the time that I am through with them in 5 years, they will be able to take down an S-class ninja with their teamwork alone without much trouble. Individually, they will be a force of nature when they reach their full potential. They will become the strongest shinobi ever to live. However, Hyuga-sama, as you may or may not have noticed, I am one short of a full set, and that is where I need your help. In return, I will tell you the fate of your family and how it truly became the strongest clan in Konoha. As he finished, he leaned back, his face devoid of expression, even if his clear violet-colored eyes held the same amount of intensity. For his part, Hayashi could see nothing but benefits from the proposal. He was extremely curious about the future of his clan, and his intuition was practically screaming at him to accept. Still, he needed to know more first, about both general future events and what other actions are being taken in the present, but he could ask the Sandaime about the particulars later. At the moment, he needed to know exactly which of the Hyuga children did they have in mind, since that is the only conclusion that he could come up with for his presence being needed. You know of a Hyuga that can keep up and be an asset in a team with 2 Jinchurikis with complete control over their demon's chakra? Hi. However, this would not be so much as how powerful they can be individually, because the difference in raw power between each will be enormous. The issue here is the potential they have while working together. I see. What kind of training will they undergo? A Hyuga is at its most effective when they master the gentle fist or juken fighting style, as it was designed specifically for the use of our eyes. This was one of the only things that he could find wrong with the arrangement. The possibility of the child's eyes not being trained properly with their bloodline worried him. The child that I have in mind was one of my closest friends, and by teaching me the basics of the gentle fist, I was able to help in the development of several new techniques that can be used with the Byakugan, so I will be able to teach it and supervise his use of it, along with many improvements and techniques that we developed while I learned it. I had also planned on paying you a visit every few weeks so that you might evaluate their progress in the style as well. Aside from that, I know that the Hyuga have as great an affinity with water as the Uchiha have with fire, so I will incorporate that in the training, making that the foundation of the child's fighting style. He nodded, some tension easing slightly from his body. It's true that he wasn't particularly pleased that a non-Hyuga knew so many of the clan's secrets, as this young man alleged, but he did not know what the situation was when the Rokudaime of the future learned of them, so he couldn't judge just yet. Still, even with that, the benefits outweighed the perceived slight to clan tradition. Looking toward the silent Kages, he saw them watching their interactions intently. And if their expressions were anything to go by, he could conclude that even if they knew that the young man wanted a Hyuga to complete this team, they had no idea which one it was. He did not have anything against the vessels, so that wasn't an issue. Besides, they were going to be trained on how to harness the power that they were burdened with. If anything, they would be an asset to the village. He would have to ask him of what kind of training would the vessels go through at a later time. He knew that he had just been told the basics of what he was planning to teach the young Hyuga, but he couldn't blame him for not disclosing any more. After all, he had still not given any answer. But he still had some questions though. Where would this training take place? The fact that it was Sandaime that answered surprised him. It will be in a new area a day's travel away from Konoha, deep inside the mountains and forests of Fire Country, within one of the isolated valleys. It should be ready in a few days' time. That's good news, Nawaki said. The preparations took less time than I had hoped then. Which reminds me, Tsunade spoke up. There were certain supplies that couldn't be found at this time, but most of it should be easy to locate not far from the village. If we put it in as a mission request, we could have them here by the end of the week, especially the medical supplies. There are some herbs and seeds that you asked for that are a bit tricky to find. That's not a problem, as long as we have everything when we set out. Hayashi just looked between them, finally coming to terms with the fact that this 5-year training expedition would take place on the outsides of the village. The level of secrecy involved was mind-boggling, especially if the 3 Kages were doing most of the grunt work themselves. Then again, once you take into account that 2 of those training will be learning how to manipulate demonic chakra, it was entirely understandable. He shuddered to think about how some villagers would react at feeling the Kyuubi's chakra once more. I guess that I have only one question left for tonight. Ask away, Hyuga-sama, Nawaki said, a smile tugging at his lips. Who do you have in mind for this team? He knew that that would be the question. It had really taken more time to be asked than he would have imagined, but this younger Hyuga Hayashi didn't seem as hard and as cold as the one he had met. He respected the clan head anyways, as he had helped him with his taijutsu when he was learning some of the gentle fist. He never did master it because it was designed so it could be used with the Hyuga eyes, but what he learned was enough to make his own fighting style much more fluid. He wouldn't mention that, of course. It was enough that a non-Hyuga knew the basics. If the patriarch found out that he knew more than that before he gained his trust would be a disaster. As it stood, he had really come to believe that the Hyuga truly were the strongest clan in Konoha, so who better than a Hyuga to fill the last place in this team? There was only one person who would be able to fit as well and learn as much. As the years passed, they had become closer friends and were almost unbeatable fighting partners. If he could teach their younger versions to work like that while they were still young and throw Gaara into the mix, well, It was a recipe for success, a perfect synergy of attack and defense, action and reaction. Looking over at the Hyuga clan head, he just answered, Hyuga Neji. Nothing else needed to be said. Neji? Hayashi asked, surprised. He had not been able to get close to the boy after his father had died, and his resentment for the main house of the clan grew with each passing day. He had hoped that someday he would be able to explain the circumstances of that day and his brother's choice. He would have gladly died in his brother's place, but such was his fate, as all Hyugas before him. But as he thought about it, maybe there is hope for his brother's son yet. Maybe he managed to change his fate like his father had wanted him to. Maybe he had learned a different path. But then, maybe he still hated the main family. Rubbing a hand to his temples, he gathered his thoughts and tried to think objectively. He knew nothing of the other two boys, so he didn't understand the role that Neji would play on this team. However, if what the young Kage said was true, then perhaps he could help the boy tap into his potential sooner, and help him activate his Byakugan earlier. After all, even though children were taught the gentle fist from an early age, they did not learn how to activate and use their eyes until they had enough chakra to maintain it, which was usually after 8 years of age. Thinking on the boy, he realized that he was already in his first year of the academy. So if he agreed to this, it would raise all sorts of questions. But noting the scheming look on the Godame's face, he was sure that things could be arranged in such a way that no undue attention was brought to him. Needing more information, he began with general reason. Why Neji? Do you know of his situation? Yes, I know of his situation. As to why him? Easy. The practical answer is that Neji will be the strongest Hyuga to be produced in the clan since its creation. He will inherit the Hyuga bloodline limit to an extent never seen before in your clan's history. He was the rookie of the year in his academy class. He learned and mastered the heavenly spin and other main house techniques by simple observation by the time he turned 14. He became a Chunin in his second attempt at the exam and a Jonin soon after at the age of 15. But those are only the technical reasons that will allow him to keep up with 2 Jinchuriki. If he was able to do so much without aid and only the academy's instruction, imagine how much he will grow under the tutelage of an S-class shinobi who will give him more than one-on-one attention. Here Nawaki just frowned, and a second later, 3-tailed clones come out of his shimmering form, as if stepping out of his back. Gesturing toward the clones, their tails waved this way and that before they disappeared, leaving 3 perfect replicas of Nawaki. This is one of my best techniques, he continued, ignoring the look on the clan patriarch's face. They are tailed clones, a variation of the replication technique that only I can produce, for they are living, breathing copies of me that have the equivalent of 1 tail's worth of Kyuubi's chakra in them. I can make 9 of these clones, 1 for each tail that the demon fox possessed. Interested, Hayashi activated his Byakugan once more, looking at the clones. It was true, they were precise copies, and they looked exactly like shadow clones but for one very defining factor. Each of these clones had a different kind of seal that, now that he looked closer, could be found in the original. Confused, he took a better look and listened as what he was seeing was explained to him. I see you noticed the difference between us and the real thing, spoke the clone on Nawaki's left. If you focus your eyes, you will notice that there are 3 seal sequences missing on the original's chakra coils. Hearing this, Hayashi took a closer look and was amazed at what he saw. There were indeed 3 seal sequences missing that he had seen before, but they were not completely gone. A light gray shadow of them remained on the original, marking where the seals that the clones now wore had been located. As he followed each sequence of seals, he saw that there were 10 sequences of seals on the original's body. However, just as he was taking note of this, Nawaki's chakra started to move and split, highlighting one of these seals because of the amount of chakra being channeled into it. The next second, another clone appeared behind him. Before his very own eyes, the seal faded slightly, changing from the prominent black-colored seal to a light gray one. But then something happened that he wasn't expecting. All of the seals began to fade and then, only the chakra coils remained. At that moment, he couldn't tell the clones apart from the original. Their chakra flowed exactly the same way, down to the muscles and the slight film of chakra that seemed to wrap around their body, protecting it. Only a Hyuga can see the seals that help me control the amount of chakra needed to create one of these clones, the young Hokage said, even as the clones disappeared within the original, highlighting the seals before they too faded from his sight. When the last clone was absorbed, he deactivated his Byakugan, looking extremely confused. But I have long learned to hide them from your eyes as well. Folding his hands once more, Nawaki continued his explanation. The 2 main differences between my clones and shadow clones are that when I create a tailed clone, we still share the same mind, so I could know what all of my clones are thinking and doing if I wanted to, as opposed to the individual mentalities of normal shadow clones. The fact that only fatal blows can incapacitate them makes them unique. Just imagine, I have the ability to create 10 exact copies of myself, and each individual one can be ranked as an S-class shinobi. Hayashi was speechless. He couldn't fathom the potential for such a technique. He could make actual replications of himself. Fighting one of them would be like fighting the original. If he were to use such a technique in battle, he could overwhelm almost any force. After all, we are talking about 10 completely coordinated, S-class shinobi, and unless you kill the original, winning would be almost impossible. If the young Hokage stayed behind, it would mean that to get to him, someone would have to eliminate his 9 clones first. If the remaining chakra from the clones went back to the original as he had seen when the clones dispersed, he could just make a new clone or use the chakra for other things. He couldn't even imagine how powerful the young man probably was while fighting without the clones, but there was something that he didn't understand about the technique yet. How long can you keep all 9 clones for any one time before you have to cancel them? After all, if the fact that they would share your mind is true, then it would stand to reason that you could become mentally fatigued if you use them for too much time. Nodding, the time traveler gave a smile at this observation. As you know, research into our mental capabilities produced by the Yamanaka family has proven that normal civilians use between 5 and 7% of their minds. Ninjas are trained in such a way that they can use from 7 to 10% at any given time, maybe more. This technique makes it possible to partition my brain in such a way that each of my clones uses no more than 10% of my mind each, which brings us to your question, Hyuga-sama. I can maintain the state of mind without assistance for about an hour when all my clones are in use. And with assistance, how much time would you be able to maintain them? Tsunade asked, looking extremely interested. And exactly what kind of support would you need and what does it entail? What I mean by that is that there are seals that can be used to put my original body into a sleep-like state, aided by some mind-relaxing techniques and the like. When in this state, I can keep my clones without side effects until they are all destroyed and I have to make them once more. One downside of this is that these seals need to be maintained by another person's chakra. That I can remain as such depends on that person's chakra capacity. The other downside of this is that while I am in this dream-like state, I am completely vulnerable. Anyone with sufficient chakra control can maintain the seal, and I have even been in this state during an attack on Konoha while a group of genins served as my support. I see, so only those that can be trusted can assist you in this, and then, there would have to be someone strong enough to protect you and those maintaining the seals, should anything happen. But you are speaking of the maximum amount of clones. Is there a safe number that would not cause any discomfort to your mind? Actually, Tsunade, there is. At the moment I can maintain 3 clones active at all times without having to worry. If I use more than that, the time I can maintain them decreases the more clones I use. However, the fact that my chakra levels are so depleted at the moment means that even though I can maintain them for such long periods of time, they won't have near enough chakra to actually be useful in a fight with anyone of Jonin level or higher. But it is enough to teach 3 brats to be shinobi, I think. At that statement, Hayashi finally understood. If he could keep 3 clones indefinitely without any side effects, he could easily teach the 3 boys individually so that they can learn at an accelerated rate. After all, they would get personal instruction by an S-class shinobi that already knows them personally, making him a perfect candidate to bring out their potential and even help them surpass what their future versions would be like. It was a brilliant method of education, to be sure. If it was true that Neji had achieved what the young Hokage was saying, even without any help besides academy instruction and maybe some influence from his Jonin sensei, then how much stronger could the boy get if he learned from a Kage that probably knew him better than anyone else? That probably knew all the techniques that he had learned? That probably knew how he thought and how he acted? It was a startling premise. Would he dare not give the boy that kind of opportunity? It would only benefit the young Hyuga and the whole of the clan, not to mention the village itself, and that was all he needed to think to know what he would answer. He would allow it. He owed at least that much to his brother. Very well, I will speak to Neji and inform him of this turn of events, he said, standing up and noticing that he had spent no more than 2 hours in this meeting. For some reason, he thought it had been longer. I still don't understand all of the details of this situation. But if Sandame-sama and Godame-same think that it is in the village's best interest, then I would give my full support. He gave a slight bow to the now standing time traveler who had earned his respect. Excellent, the young Hokage said, responding to the bow with a nod. I would still like for us to meet in 4 days' time, Hyuga-sama. There is much that we should discuss that concerns your clan. I made a promise to Neji when we fought in the finals of our first Chunin exams that I would change the Hyuga and their fate of hatred when I became the Hokage of Konoha. I intend to uphold that promise here in the past as I did when the title and name of Rokudame Hokage was granted to me. For it was his wish and his dream for the Hyuga to stand as one, united. Only then can they truly become the strongest clan in Konohagakure no Sato. That statement was said with such belief that it made Hayashi pause as he thought of the future of his clan and the prospect this presented. A united Hyuga family had been a dream that he had thought lost. But if it could be accomplished, if the Hyuga could truly become one with the fate to prosper and grow together and not the destiny to be forever separate, forever hating each other. Turning toward the young Hokage, he gave him another bow, this one of gratitude. It was a pleasure to meet you, Uzumaki Naruto. You have my profound gratitude for what you are doing and have already done. If there is anything else that you might need from me, do not hesitate to ask. Please, Hyuga-sama, the time traveler said, looking faintly uncomfortable, there is no need for that. And please call me Nawaki. There is already an Uzumaki Naruto in Konoha, and he is but 5 years of age. Of course, he responded with a nod. Good then, Sarutobi spoke up from the clan leader's right as he began leading Hayashi toward the entrance. If you require anything else, I will be available for the next few days. You should know that they will set out in 7 days' time, have young Neji ready by then. If you think that it would be beneficial for me to meet with the boy before our departure, let the Sandaime know and I'll be sure to pay him a visit whenever possible. As it is, I need to speak with young Naruto tomorrow morning before I have to start monitoring the seal, Nawaki said from Hayashi's left. Then I will bid you a good night, the Hyuga patriarch said as they reached the entrance to the house. Sandaime-sama, Godame-sama, he bowed and then turned slightly to Nawaki, who was standing in the shadows so that he would not be noticed by any who would be able to see them from the outside, and gave him a nod. I will be in contact. There are still a few things that I am curious about. Certainly, Tsunade responded. We will be waiting and answer whatever questions you may have. Good night. And with that and Sandaime's parting nod, the Kages departed into the residence, probably to check on the young Jinchuriki. Hyuga Hayashi would have not believed it if he hadn't seen it with his own eyes. But if there was someone who had both the power and the knowledge to come back in time, someone who had such a will that it changes the very fabric of destiny, then maybe the Hyuga's fate can also be changed. After seeing what the young man was capable of and the sheer potential that his existence represented, then maybe it would be alright if for once, just this once, he allowed himself to hope. The morning sun dawned upon the serene setting of the village hidden in the leaves, its golden rays highlighting the morning dew and calling to attention that a new day has begun. Ninjas on duty patrolled without pause as the rest of the village started stirring and preparing for a fresh new day. Truly, this village has seen many things in its 7 decades of existence, but it is the things that are not seen that offer the most interesting stories. After all, it is said that within the tree of Konoha, every single leaf has its shadow and its secrets, and depending on how the sun shines on a particular leaf, can the importance of those secrets be revealed, even if the secrets themselves remain hidden. For there are as many different types of shadows as there are secrets in a village full of shinobi. There are those of little importance, shadows that dance and waver depending on the movements of the sun's rays. There are those temporary shadows that only show themselves when a branch is ruffled in a particular way, and even shadows that are darker and more steady, always visible but still concealing their true nature. If we were to make comparisons and find an example, we could say that this last type of shadow, this particular solid secret that everyone knows exists but still remains concealed, can find its form in the Forbidden Scroll of Seals, among other things. That is a particular shadow that everyone knows to be real, yet remains secret to all but a few individuals. Then, there are those shadows that are never seen, but still exist. Shadows concealed within the shade of other leaves and blocked from the sun's revealing rays by the tree's main branches, so protected are the things hidden within its shade. It is one of these particular shadows that lead us to this story, a shadow that remains hidden by others and obscured from ever being detected. A shadow that will fade slowly, never seeing the light of day, never revealed or lightened by the very rays of morning light that shone upon the village of Konoha. Still, at this very moment, that particular shadow will find a new leaf to provide shade to his secret, even if the young leaf did not know, and may never know, what it is helping to hide. After all, not all those that keep secrets as deep as these know of them themselves. Or at least they don't discover them for quite a while. So as a tall violet-eyed young man stepped out of the shadows that still lurked within Uzumaki Naruto's apartment, the metaphorical tree of Konoha and its branches shifted once more as fate and destiny succumbed to a more powerful force, Nawaki's unbendable will. Slowly, the time traveler stepped into the rays of light that flitted through the windows, looking around in reminiscence at his former apartment. He looked from the battered couch to the empty cereal boxes and cups of instant ramen. He looked at the small table and its single chair, a story of the loneliness that the child who inhabits this room suffers in and of itself. He glanced at the strewn clothes and walked toward one of the many healthy plants that littered the small place. They were strong, with full green leaves. These potted plants used to be his only companions when he was young, and he remembered taking care of them until the day that he had to find a new home for them when they no longer fit into such a small space as a simple pot. Finally, he turned toward the small bed, where the apartment's current resident was still sleeping, and watched, with a twitch of his masked lips, the tangle of limbs and blankets that are the present-day Uzumaki Naruto. He truly didn't remember ever being so small. Wide eyes and button nose scrunched up in sleep, unruly golden hair sticking out in every direction like soft, agitated fur. Big white shirt all bunched up along with his blanket, and his tummy, which the intruder knew intimately held the seal that contained the slumbering fox demon, was exposed for all of the room to see. He idly wondered when it was that he had stopped wearing the glaring orange boxers with blue stripes and started wearing the more mild green ones with orange swirls. If he remembered correctly, he loved those boxers so much that he got himself a ninja outfit of the same color when the boxers started to get too small, and he could not find any more in the same colors. It was his first ninja outfit, if memory served. His violet-colored eyes, now a shade or two lighter, fell once again on the golden hair, and he noticed how his own was much darker, almost as if the gold had dimmed and become tarnished with age, when he knew that it was because of his heavy use of the Kyuubi's chakra. This time, however, he would make sure that it stayed the same, bright gold, untainted and unspoiled. There were too many preconceived notions about Jinchurikis, and Jiraiya had measured him and trained him with that knowledge in mind, without considering the differences between one demon vessel and the others, and the particular difficulties that could arise from being the vessel of the strongest-tailed beast in the world. After all, the Kyuubi had never been sealed before, and the seal used to imprison him had never been used beforehand. It had been a gamble to train him as other Jinchurikis had been trained, but he had to admit, they hadn't known any better at the time. This time, the bright-haired child he was looking at would not suffer those same mistakes or the same consequences. He would get to live a fuller, longer life. It was one more promise in a very long list, one that he intended to see fulfilled. And with that in mind, he plopped unceremoniously beside the bed and rested his right elbow on the mattress, holding his masked cheek with his right hand, and became still. Watching. Truly, he really didn't remember being so short. No wonder they had called him a shrimp. Well, that's another thing he'd have to fix. With a sudden smile, plainly visible beneath his mask, he thought of all the things he could improve upon, and all the things that he had not been taught in the academy that he had to roughly learn with life and experience. His eyes focusing on the scrunched-up face, he finally decided on a course of action and how to better approach training 3 young boys. After all, he had always wanted some kind of family when he was young. This time, the child in front of him would at least have an older brother, if only for a few years. He would make sure that the young blonde learned what a family was like from an earlier age. Not only would he teach them how to be exceptional shinobi, he would teach them how to be honorable human beings, how to love and care for their friends, along with how to protect them, how to have fun and play, along with how to learn and think on their own. He would give them these 5 years full of life, where every minute of every day they could feel that life and learn to cherish it, lean to live it to their fullest. And now, so close to the end of his existence, he would make sure that his dreams and his morals, his will and his hopes would all live on in his 3 students, his charges, and his past friends, now possible little brothers of his heart, if not his blood. Smiling a bit wider at his thoughts, he gave them a new label, not just friends, comrades, or precious people. Gaara, Neji, and the small Naruto. These 3 would become the most valuable beings in his existence. They would become his very dear and priceless hope, for each one of them would carry a bit of his legacy and some of his heart. He was and would give his life for theirs, so that their lives would be better and their future brighter. And as the small face that he was watching smoothed out and sleepy and bright blue eyes opened, eyes that he had not seen for years now, his world and his priorities reduced themselves in that very instance. Konoha was already safe and would become stronger than ever under the leadership of its 5th Hokage. But it was while staring at the sleepy blue eyes that he had not seen in a mirror for so long that his priorities focused completely on the small child in front of him and the 2 others that would become a part of the same team. He wondered if this is what a sensei feels when he gets his first genin team. What with the knowledge of the great impact that your actions and teachings would have on their young lives. Truly, it was an empowering, all-encompassing feeling. However, his musings were interrupted when he saw the crystal blue eyes that were staring at him sideways clouded over with confusion. It was a strange reaction, to be sure. He had imagined that Naruto would have jumped back, startled, or yelled at him for being in his apartment. Instead, the sapphire-like blue eyes suddenly looked at him with such hope that it was almost heart-wrenching. It seemed that even at this age the small blonde could take others by surprise, even an older version of himself. Perhaps his memories of himself were more tainted than he had thought. It was entirely possible that his own pursuit for acknowledgement had changed him in such a way that he could not even remember how he had been before. But still, as the boy took his tiny fist to his eyes and rubbed them, trying to find out if he was seeing things, he turned his attention fully back to his past self. Truthfully, he didn't remember being so cute when he was a brat. He was 100% sure that his whiskered cheeks would have been pinched to death if not for the demon fox sealed in the still exposed belly. Then again, maybe that was a good thing. Grandmothering old hags were a pain, if Tsunade was any indication. Tilting his head to his left, removing his cheek from his fisted right hand, which made his long hair pool on his left shoulder in the same movements, his eyes curving up with the force of his smile, he took his now free right hand and gave a little wave. Yo. Kakashi would have been proud. Although he was sure that the mask helped a bit. Naruto, for his part, knew exactly who the man before him was from the first time he opened his eyes, thanks to Tsunade Bacon's descriptions, but was still confused as to his future teacher's presence in his apartment so early in the morning. No one had told him that he might be stopping by, so he was understandably puzzled. But then, after he rubbed his eyes a bit, and his brain finally catched up with him, he finally noticed that this was his sensei, the man who had acknowledged him and his potential even before meeting him. The hope that had started welling within him when he first opened his eyes suddenly come back with such force that it almost knocked him down, and the fact that the strangely colored eyes with the elongated pupils shone with warmth and merriment only filled his own small heart with happiness, for here was yet another person that did not look at him with cold, unfeeling eyes. This man's eyes told so many things that he could not even hope to interpret all of them. The boy scrambled out of bed in a second and almost tumbled head first into the floor in his excitement if not for his sensei catching him and setting him straight. His hippo nightcap, although he didn't truly know if it was a hippo, but it did kinda look like one, flopped to the side of his head. His wild golden hair poked out every which way, and the too large shirt almost reached all the way to his knees. It was then that Nawaki noticed the small orange socks that he didn't remember owning, that his smile widened into a full-out grin. Damn, he was cute as a brat. Hey, are you Nawaki-sensei? A high voice, squeaky with sleep, but bursting with suppressed excitement, asked. Naruto was almost jumping with joy and nearly bursting with questions, if the vibrating was any indication. So Nawaki, still sitting on the floor after catching the stumbling boy, just nodded and practically beamed at the kid. Okay, so maybe his memories of himself weren't so bad after all. Sure am, kid. And I'm here to take you to eat some breakfast, maybe get to know you better before we set out to start your ninja training. How's that? Yada! The boy cheered, stumbling to disentangle himself from the tangled blankets of doom. I'll just get changed, Nawaki-sensei. Came the quick response as a white shirt smacked him straight in the face before a small orange sock joined it when he removed the first piece of clothing that had attacked him. During his brief period of blindness, much ruckus was heard as the sounds of a hyperactive, crashing blonde getting ready for the day reached his ears. When all obstructions were removed and his vision was restored once again, he noticed the almost 6-year-old as he jumped this way and that, trying to fit his other leg into his green shorts while attempting to put a black t-shirt on at the same time. The thing was, it seemed that the boy still hadn't found the place where his head was supposed to stick out, and both his small arms were waving around in a blind panic. Chuckling, Nawaki just called out, "Kid, stop," and stood up, walking toward the now still boy, even though he was still hopping on one leg and looked like some sort of constipated flamingo. You don't need to dress all at once, you know, he commented as he helped the boy find where his head was supposed to go, which in turn allowed the small blonde to notice where the other leg went in his shorts. Nawaki hadn't felt so lighthearted in years, especially when the small beaming face turned in his direction. His smile turning suddenly sheepish, Naruto quickly finished dressing, put on his sandals and went toward his new sensei who was now curiously looking over the stuff he had packed with Tsunade Bachan for their trip. Nah, Nawaki-sensei, what are you doing? Okay, so maybe he had added a few things that Granny Tsunade had forgotten about, like lots of ramen. When his sensei turned to him, a smile still noticeable in his face, he smiled back without hesitation. Come here and sit by me, Naruto. I have a few questions for you before we go get some breakfast. Sure thing, sensei, came the energetic reply. Good. First things first, I'm not your sensei at the moment. He raised a hand to stall the protests that were about to come out of the boy's mouth, which promptly closed. We won't be starting your training for about a week, and even when we do, I won't be acting as your teacher all of the time, so call me something else while we're not training, alright? Naruto thought this over and grinned suddenly. Right, Nawaki Naiken. The older of the two just smiled wider and nodded. That reminded him of Konohamaru, but then he noticed something. He didn't remember ever being so attentive as a child. Was he truly so eager to learn before the teachers at the academy had stepped on his ambitions? Well, he would make sure that the boy learned everything that would have been denied to him and more. But that was neither here nor there. So, derailing those thoughts and ruffling the blonde spikes, he winked at the boy before turning back to the luggage. Great. Now, we're going to move what you're taking over to Sandame Gigi's this morning, and you'll be staying with the old man and me until we leave. So we need to make sure that you're not missing anything, he explained, rummaging around the packs and noticing the cups of instant ramen stuffed haphazardly with the clothes and other things. Tsking. Nawaki shook his head in mock consternation, almost laughing at the look of complete and utter worry that had started to develop on the child's face because of his dramatics. This won't do at all. What won't do, Nawaki Naiken? The anxious look on the boy's face was almost overwhelming. His blue eyes were so bright. Well, the older blonde exclaimed, making a show out of taking each and every instant ramen cup out of the pack and placing them right in front of Naruto, a severe frown on his face. This, Naruto, he said, waving the last ramen cup on the young boy's distraught face. You won't be able to take this, he said with a seriousness that he did not possess at that moment, and the small boy was almost on the verge of a mental breakdown, probably wondering what kind of hell he had agreed to go to, where ramen was not accepted. The young blonde had gone pasty white, and was almost to the point of fainting when his new sensei spoke up once more. I mean, I learned to make ramen from the best ramen chef in all of the world, he declared grandly, the gloom being torn away abruptly from the young boy's expression. Cooking ramen will be one of the first things you'll learn to cook under my tutelage. So you don't need to worry about bringing this trash with you, he said in mock disdain, pointing at the instant cups of ramen. When I'm through with you boys in 5 years, you'll be able to cook the best ramen you'll ever find in only 2 minutes. By now, Naruto's eyes were sparkling and a bit of drool escaped the corner of his mouth. Really? Came the question, full of hope as it was. It made Nawaki grin fiercely. You could train to be a ninja while learning to cook, along with many other things that may seem to be just common household work, or even common games. He just needed to get the 3 boys interested in it, and then make it fun for them. They wouldn't even notice what they would be learning until he pointed it out to them, and by then they would enjoy it too much to say anything. If nothing else, it would help them interact, work together and depend on each other. If he had anything to say about it, they would have better teamwork than any genin team by the end of the first year with him, whether they noticed it or not. Smiling, he ruffled the boy's hair again. Really? I won't only be teaching you in the arts of the ninja profession, but I'll also be teaching you everything you need to know about life in general and how to take care of yourself in the future. When he finished saying this, 2 clones materialized in a poof of ninja smoke and blurred into action, cleaning and packing the whole apartment. Being a shinobi is not all about fighting and strength. If you want to be a great shinobi, there are a lot of other things that you need to learn. Staring every which way in pure wonder, Naruto only saw as dust vanished and things started shining, how his clothes disappeared, only to reappear in front of Nawaki Niken, folded impeccably. The empty ramen cups made their way into the trash can, and the bed was made in less than a second along with many other things. When his sensei started speaking again, packing his bags once more, his attention was absolute. Yes, you need to be strong to be a good ninja. He started while packing everything neatly, but there are a great amount of other skills needed as well. You need to learn the art of the body, taijutsu, and its most basic form, how to take care of that body by eating right. You need to know how to take care of and observe your surroundings and then learn how to influence it with ninjutsu. You need to develop your senses before you can learn to disrupt them or manipulate them with genjutsu. You need to be smart enough to know when to fight and when not to. These are the most basic of things that make a good ninja. But do you want to be just a good ninja? He asked. Naruto shook his head furiously. He didn't just want to be some good ordinary ninja. He wanted to be the greatest ninja ever. I thought so, Nawaki said, his face as serious as can be as he turned to stare the boy in the eyes. But you know that it will take a great amount of effort to be a great ninja, right Naruto? There will be days where you will be too tired to even lift a finger, days where you will be bored beyond all measure. There will be days when you will learn so much that your brain will feel like bursting, he explained and kneeled in front of a now solemn little boy. You will sweat, you will cry, and you will bleed. You will get intimately acquainted with the meaning of pain, but at the same time you will learn discipline and self-control. I will show you how to teach yourself and prepare you for the time that I can no longer keep teaching you. His face softened and he smiled at the determination that he saw in those blue eyes. But at the same time, you will have fun and learn to enjoy being a shinobi. You will find a family of brothers within your teammates and me. Do you think you can do all of that and more to reach your dream, Naruto? Can you give me your whole being, mind, body and soul, so I can teach you how and mold you into the greatest ninja to have ever lived? For you have the potential to do it, you just need the desire to achieve it. And at his last words he suddenly found that he had his arms full of blonde, shaking boy, babbling an indescribable amount of nonsense, his head nodding fiercely as promise after promise spilled from his lips, promising with all of his heart that he would work his hardest and make him, Ojiken and Obaken proud. It was at that moment that he was finally able to separate himself from the young blonde in his arms. They may share the same body, the same blood and even the same soul. But from that moment onward, they would be fundamentally different. So he tightened his arms around the boy, knowing just how much he had craved such comfort. True, the boy, even now, showed the untamable will that he had been told that he himself possessed, and his spirit was just as strong if not stronger than his. But experiences would make them into two separate beings. They were the same, but they would ultimately share different fates and different destinies. He had noticed it, of course, but the true impact of his actions did not register as fully before as it did now. Now he could see just how wide a divergence his presence had caused in the stream of time. But as the boy in his arms quieted down and realized his position, his small body becoming suddenly hesitant, he knew that he had done the right thing, that his sacrifices were worth it. Now, in this precise moment, he knew that he would have done it all over again, just so that the small boy in his arms would have a better future. Just so that this other part of himself could grow up with greater hope and a brighter tomorrow. He hugged the child tightly and stood up, settling the now quiet bundle comfortably in his arms and ignoring the peeking, oddly shy blue eyes that were staring up at him, and directed one of his clones to take Naruto's luggage to the Hokage's residence, while directing another to disguise itself and buy them some breakfast. When both departed, he looked down at the small child, who was really too small for his age, and smiled a small smile. Now, little one, hold on tight, we're going to have a picnic. When he felt the small arms tighten, he took a look around in the next second. Only the swirl of shadowed leaves could have told of their departure, and even then, no trace was left of them a mere second later. Uzumaki Naruto would never see his small apartment again, but in Nawaki's mind, that was a good thing. Even the potted plants would soon find a better home.